Welcome, weary travelers of the modern world. Tonight we embark on a gentle journey through the mists of time, to kingdoms that once flourished, but have since faded into whispers and shadows. Let your breathing slow, your muscles relax, as we explore these forgotten realms together. Close your eyes if you wish, and let the soft cadence of history wash over you like a warm, comforting tide. These are not the kingdoms you learned about in school. These are not the mighty empires that dominated your history textbooks. Instead, these are the gentle, forgotten realms that existed in the quiet corners of our world. Kingdoms that rose and fell, like the turning of seasons, leaving behind only traces for us to discover and remember in this peaceful moment. So settle in, make yourself comfortable, and let us begin our tranquil exploration of the Kingdom of Kush, nestled along the life-giving waters of the Nile. Far to the south of ancient Egypt, beyond the rushing cataracts of the great Nile River, there once existed a kingdom of remarkable beauty and prosperity. The Kingdom of Kush, also known as Nubia, flourished for over 1,000 years, from around 1070 BCE to 350 CE. This was a realm where the golden sands of the desert met the fertile banks of the river, creating a landscape of breathtaking contrasts and serene beauty. The Kushites were master craftsmen, their hands skilled in working precious metals that glinted softly in the warm African sun. Gold flowed from their mines like water from a gentle spring, and their artisans created jewelry and ornaments of such delicate beauty that they adorned the pharaohs of Egypt themselves. Imagine the quiet workshops where these craftsmen labored, the soft tapping of hammers on metal creating a rhythmic, almost musical sound that echoed gently through the peaceful streets of their cities. The capital city of Meroe sat like a jewel beside the Nile, its buildings constructed from warm sandstone that glowed golden in the evening light. The city was home to magnificent pyramids, smaller and more intimate than their Egyptian counterparts, yet no less beautiful. These pyramids rose from the desert floor like gentle monuments to eternity, their stepped sides catching the soft light of dawn and dusk in ways that seemed almost magical. The Kushite rulers, known as the Kandakes or Candaces, were often women of great wisdom and strength. One such ruler was Queen Amanirenas, who ruled around 40 BCE. She was known for her diplomatic skills and her ability to maintain peace with the Roman Empire to the north, even as Roman legions marched through other lands. Picture her court where silk curtains fluttered gently in the warm breeze, and advisors spoke in hushed, respectful tones while incense burned softly in bronze braziers. The daily life in Kush moved at the peaceful pace of the river itself. Farmers tended their crops along the fertile banks, the green shoots of grain swaying gently in the breeze. Fishermen cast their nets in the early morning hours, when the mist still hung low over the water, and the world was quiet, except for the gentle lapping of waves against their papyrus boats. Children played in the shade of date palms, their laughter mixing with the soft rustle of palm fronds overhead. The Kushites were also great traders, their caravans moving slowly and steadily across the desert routes that connected Africa to the Mediterranean world. These caravans carried not just gold and ivory, but also exotic woods, rare incense, and precious stones. Imagine these trading expeditions, the soft padding of camel feet on sand, the gentle tinkling of bells attached to the animals' harnesses, and the quiet conversations of traders as they rested around their campfires under the vast star-filled desert sky. Religion in Kush was a gentle blend of local traditions and Egyptian influences. The god Amun was particularly revered, and temples dedicated to him rose gracefully from the landscape, their columns carved with intricate hieroglyphs that told stories of divine protection and earthly prosperity. Priests performed their rituals with calm precision, their voices rising and falling in ancient chants that seemed to harmonize with the eternal rhythm of the river. The written language of Kush, known as Meroitic, remains only partially deciphered today, adding an air of peaceful mystery to this ancient kingdom. The script, with its flowing curves and elegant lines, was carved into stone monuments and written on papyrus scrolls that have survived the centuries like whispered secrets from the past. Scholars today still work quietly in their studies, piecing together the meaning of these ancient words, each discovery adding another gentle layer to our understanding of this remarkable civilization. As the centuries passed, the kingdom of Kush gradually declined, not through violent conquest, but through the slow, natural processes of change. Trade routes shifted, the river's course altered slightly, and new powers rose in neighboring regions. The last Kushite rulers governed smaller and smaller territories, their kingdoms shrinking like shadows at midday until finally, around 350 CE, the kingdom was absorbed by the rising Aksumite Empire. But the legacy of Kush lives on in the archaeological treasures that still emerge from the sands, in the genetic heritage of the Sudanese people, and in the peaceful memory of a kingdom that once controlled the flow of gold and goods between Africa and the ancient world. The ruins of Meroe still stand today, their weathered stones warmed by the same sun that blessed the Kushite people over 2 millennia ago, a testament to the enduring power of human civilization and the gentle passage of time. Let us now drift further back in time, to another forgotten realm, the kingdom of Dilmun, where pearl divers descended into the crystal-clear waters of the Persian Gulf. In the warm, turquoise waters of the Persian Gulf, where the morning sun cast dancing patterns of light beneath the gentle waves, there once existed a kingdom so prosperous and peaceful that ancient texts described it as a paradise on earth. This was Dilmun, a maritime civilization that flourished from around 3200 BCE to 600 BCE, centered on what is now the island nation of Bahrain. The name Dilmun appears in some of humanity's earliest written records, mentioned in Sumerian texts as a land of immortality and divine blessing. According to these ancient stories, Dilmun was where the sun first rose each day, where freshwater springs bubbled up from the earth without end, and where the very air seemed to carry the promise of eternal peace and prosperity. The heart of Dilmun's wealth lay beneath the waves, in the vast oyster beds that carpeted the seafloor of the Gulf. Here, generations of skilled pearl divers perfected their ancient craft, diving deep into the crystal-clear waters with nothing but their breath and their courage. These divers, known as Gorwas, would rise before dawn, their boats setting out across waters so still they reflected the stars like a mirror. The diving season lasted from May to September, when the waters were warmest and the currents most favorable. Imagine the serene ritual of the pearl diving expedition. The boats, called samborgs, glided silently across the water, their triangular sails catching the gentle morning breeze. The divers prepared themselves with quiet concentration, coating their bodies with fish oil to protect against jellyfish stings, and inserting clips made from turtle shell over their noses to keep out the seawater. A rope around the waist connected each diver to the surface, and a small basket hung at their side to collect the precious oysters. Down into the blue depths they would descend, sometimes as deep as 40 feet, their movements graceful and deliberate in the underwater silence. Schools of silver fish parted gently before them, and rays of sunlight filtered down through the water like golden threads. The divers could hold their breath for several minutes, their bodies perfectly adapted to this ancient rhythm of descent and ascent, of pressure and release. The pearls they brought to the surface were treasures beyond imagining. Some were perfectly round and lustrous white, others took on subtle hues of pink, cream, or silver. The most prized were those with a perfect spherical shape and a deep, mysterious luster that seemed to glow from within. These pearls would eventually find their way to the courts of Mesopotamian kings, to Egyptian pharaohs, and to wealthy merchants throughout the ancient world. But Dilmun was more than just pearls. The kingdom served as a vital trading hub, strategically positioned at the crossroads of maritime routes connecting Mesopotamia, India, and East Africa. Merchants from across the ancient world gathered in Dilmun's ports, their ships heavy with cargo, and their minds filled with dreams of profit and adventure. The main city of Dilmun, located on what is now Bahrain Island, was a marvel of ancient urban planning. Streets paved with stone led to busy marketplaces, where the air was filled with the scents of exotic spices, frankincense, and precious woods. Warehouses lined the harbor, their thick walls providing cool shelter from the Gulf heat, while scribes carefully recorded transactions on clay tablets, using the cuneiform script they had learned from their Mesopotamian trading partners. Fresh of medis of petroleum commodity in the desert lands surrounding the Gulf, flowed abundantly in Dilmun. Natural springs, fed by underground aquifers, provided crystal-clear water for drinking, irrigation, and the ritual purification ceremonies that were central to Dilmun's religious practices. These springs were considered sacred, and temples were built around them, where priests performed ceremonies honoring Enki, the Mesopotamian god of fresh water and wisdom. The people of Dilmun lived in houses built from coral stone, their walls thick enough to keep out the heat of the day, while allowing the cool evening breezes to flow through internal courtyards. Date palms provided shade and fruit, their fronds rustling gently in the Gulf winds, while gardens bloomed with jasmine and other fragrant flowers that perfumed the warm night air. Archaeological excavations have revealed that the Dilmunites were skilled metallurgists and craftspeople. They worked copper, bronze, and precious metals, creating tools, weapons, and ornamental objects of remarkable beauty and precision. Their pottery, decorated with geometric patterns and marine motifs, shows influences from across the ancient world, reflecting Dilmun's role as a cultural crossroads, where ideas and artistic traditions mingled like waters from different streams. The religious life of Dilmun centered around the worship of deities associated with water, fertility, and the sea. Temple complexes included sacred pools, where ritual bathing took place, and altars, where offerings of pearls, precious metals, and exotic goods were made to ensure the continued prosperity of the kingdom. The ceremonies were conducted in the gentle heat of the Gulf evening, with priests chanting in voices that rose and fell like the rhythm of waves against the shore. As we continue our journey through these peaceful realms, let the image of Dilmun's pearl divers rest gently in your mind, those ancient figures rising from the depths with treasures in their hands, their movements as graceful as dancers, their lives intertwined with the eternal rhythm of the tides. The kingdom of Dilmun eventually faded as trade routes shifted and new powers arose, but its legacy lived on in the pearls that adorned the crowns of distant rulers, and in the maritime traditions that continue to this day in the Gulf waters. Now let us travel across the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean to another forgotten realm, the kingdom of Srivijaya, where monsoon winds filled the sails of merchant ships. In the warm, humid archipelago of Southeast Asia, where countless islands rise like emerald jewels from the azure waters of the Java Sea and the Straits of Malacca, there once flourished a maritime empire of extraordinary reach and influence. This was Srivijaya, a kingdom built not on land armies or fortress walls, but on the gentle mastery of wind and wave, spice and sail. From the 7th to the 13th centuries CE, Srivijaya controlled the vital sea routes between China and India, its influence stretching across what is now Indonesia, Malaysia, southern Thailand, and parts of the Philippines. The kingdom's capital, Palembang, was located on the island of Sumatra, where the Musi River met the sea, creating a natural harbor protected from the ocean's fury by surrounding islands and mangrove forests. The rise of Srivijaya was intimately connected to the rhythm of the monsoon winds that sweep across the Indian Ocean twice each year. These winds, as reliable as clockwork and as gentle as a mother's breath, allowed merchants to sail from India and China to Southeast Asia during one season, then return home when the winds reversed. Srivijaya positioned itself perfectly to take advantage of this natural phenomenon, becoming the essential stopover point where travelers could rest, resupply, and trade while waiting for favorable winds. Picture the harbor of Palembang during the height of the trading season. Ships of every description crowded the waterways: Chinese junks with their distinctive square sails, Indian dhows with their elegant curved prows, and local vessels carved from massive tropical trees. The air would be filled with a symphony of languages: Chinese merchants discussing prices in Mandarin, Indian traders bargaining in Tamil, Arab sailors sharing stories in Arabic, and local officials conducting business in Old Malay. The city itself was built largely on water, with houses constructed on stilts over the river, and connected by a network of wooden walkways and bridges. During the rainy season, when the monsoons brought their life-giving moisture to the tropical lands, the water level would rise, and the entire city would seem to float like a dream upon the swollen river. The gentle lapping of water against the wooden pilings created a constant soothing background sound that seemed to embody the peaceful nature of this water-bound civilization. Srivijaya's wealth came from its role as the middleman in the spice trade. The kingdom controlled access to the precious spices that grew only in certain Indonesian islands: nutmeg from the Banda Islands, cloves from the Moluccas, and cinnamon from Ceylon. These spices were worth more than their weight in gold in the markets of Europe and China, valued not only for their ability to preserve and flavor food, but also for their supposed medicinal properties, and their role in religious ceremonies. The process of collecting and preparing these spices was itself an art form passed down through generations. Nutmeg trees, with their evergreen leaves and aromatic fruit, were tended with careful attention by farmers who understood the subtle signs of ripeness and the proper techniques for drying and storing the precious seed within. Clove trees, which could live for centuries, were harvested when their flower buds had reached the perfect pink color that indicated maximum flavor and aroma. The work was done in the cool hours of early morning, when the air was still fresh with dew, and the tropical heat had not yet reached its full intensity. Buddhism played a central role in Srivijaya's cultural life, and the kingdom became one of the most important centers of Buddhist learning in Southeast Asia. Monks from across Asia came to study at Srivijaya's monasteries and universities, where they could access vast libraries of Sanskrit and Pali texts, engage in theological debates, and participate in meditation practices that had been refined over centuries of spiritual development. The great monastery university of Nalanda, though located in India, maintained close connections with Srivijaya, and many of the kingdom's princes and nobles traveled there to complete their education. In return, Srivijaya welcomed Buddhist scholars and teachers, creating an atmosphere of intellectual exchange that enriched the spiritual and cultural life of the kingdom. The sound of temple bells and the chanting of monks provided a peaceful backdrop to daily life, their voices rising in harmony with the natural sounds of tropical birds and rustling palm fronds. Architecture in Srivijaya reflected both the kingdom's maritime nature and its Buddhist faith. Temples were built in the distinctive style of Southeast Asian Buddhism, with stepped pyramid structures, called stupas, rising toward the sky like stylized mountains. These temples were often constructed near water, their reflection shimmering on the surface of rivers and ponds, creating an effect of doubled beauty that seemed to blur the line between the earthly and the divine. The most magnificent of these temples was Borobudur, located in Java, which, while not directly in Srivijaya territory, reflects the same cultural and artistic traditions that flourished under Srivijaya influence. This massive stone monument, with its thousands of relief sculptures and hundreds of Buddha statues, was designed as a three-dimensional representation of the Buddhist cosmos, a place where pilgrims could walk the path from earthly suffering to enlightenment. Daily life in Srivijaya moved to the rhythm of the tides and the monsoons. Fishermen set out in the early morning hours, their nets glistening with dew, to catch the abundant fish that thrived in the warm tropical waters. Farmers tended rice paddies that stretched across the river deltas, the young green shoots reflected in the still water like a living mirror. Craftsmen worked in the cool shade of palm-thatched workshops, creating intricate textiles, carved wooden sculptures, and delicate metalwork that would eventually find its way to markets across Asia. The royal court of Srivijaya was renowned for its elegance and sophistication. The Maharajas, who ruled the kingdom, were patrons of the arts and learning, surrounding themselves with poets, musicians, dancers, and scholars. Court ceremonies were elaborate affairs that could last for days, featuring processions of decorated boats, traditional dance performances, and the presentation of tribute from vassal states. Throughout the archipelago, women held positions of considerable influence in Srivijayan society, both in religious and secular contexts. Female merchants conducted business across the trade networks. Buddhist nuns achieved high levels of scholarly attainment, and royal women sometimes ruled as queens in their own right. This relatively egalitarian approach to gender roles was characteristic of many Southeast Asian societies and contributed to the peaceful and prosperous nature of Srivijayan civilization. The writing system used in Srivijaya was based on Indian scripts, adapted to write Old Malay, the kingdom's administrative language. Stone inscriptions from the period reveal a sophisticated legal and administrative system, with detailed records of land grants, temple endowments, and trading agreements. These inscriptions, carved in elegant script on dark stone, still stand today in museums and archaeological sites, silent witnesses to a civilization that valued both material prosperity and spiritual development. As the centuries passed, Srivijaya's power gradually declined due to a combination of factors: the rise of new trade routes, the emergence of rival kingdoms such as Majapahit in Java, and the eventual shift of maritime trade toward the Atlantic Ocean all contributed to the kingdom's slow fade from prominence. By the 14th century, the great ports that had once bustled with international commerce had become quiet backwaters, their warehouses empty and their harbor waters disturbed only by local fishing boats. Yet the influence of Srivijaya lived on in many ways. The Malay language, which developed as the lingua franca of the kingdom's trade networks, eventually became the basis for the modern Indonesian and Malaysian languages. The kingdom's traditions of religious tolerance and cultural synthesis provided a model for later Southeast Asian civilizations, while its maritime expertise contributed to the region's continued importance as a crossroads of international trade. Today, as archaeologists carefully excavate the remains of Srivijayan cities and temples, they uncover evidence of a civilization that achieved remarkable prosperity and cultural sophistication through peaceful means. No massive fortifications protected Srivijayan cities, no accounts survive of great military conquests. Yet for 6 centuries this kingdom controlled one of the world's most important trade routes through the sheer excellence of its merchants, the wisdom of its rulers, and the natural advantages of its geographic position. Let us now journey westward across the Indian Ocean to the ancient shores of East Africa, where another forgotten kingdom once controlled the flow of gold and ivory from the African interior. High in the Ethiopian highlands, where the air is thin and clear, and the ancient mountains reach toward an azure sky, there once stood a kingdom that served as the bridge between the classical Mediterranean world and the mysterious lands of interior Africa. This was Aksum, also known as Aksum, a civilization that flourished from approximately the 1st to the 8th centuries CE, leaving behind some of Africa's most remarkable architectural monuments and a legacy of cultural achievement that continues to influence Ethiopia to this day. The Kingdom of Aksum occupied a strategic position in what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea, controlling the vital trade routes that connected the Roman Empire with the lands beyond the Red Sea. From their highland capital, Aksumite merchants organized caravans that traveled to the ports of Agilis on the Red Sea coast, where goods from across the known world were loaded and unloaded under the watchful eyes of customs officials and royal representatives. The wealth of Aksum came from its control of several precious commodities. Gold flowed from mines in the western regions of the kingdom, carried by porters along mountain paths that wound through landscapes of breathtaking beauty. Ivory came from the elephants that roamed the lowland regions, carved by skilled craftsmen into intricate designs that adorned the palaces of Roman emperors and Byzantine nobles. But perhaps most valuable of all was frankincense and myrrh, aromatic resins that were essential for religious ceremonies throughout the ancient world. The frankincense trade was an ancient and mystical business, surrounded by secrecy and tradition. The boswellia trees that produced this precious resin grew in the arid regions of southern Arabia and the Horn of Africa. Their gnarled trunks and branches adapted to survive in landscapes where water was scarce and the sun blazed mercilessly overhead. The collection of frankincense was timed to coincide with specific seasons and weather conditions, and the knowledge of proper harvesting techniques was passed down through families of specialized collectors who guarded their secrets jealously. Picture the frankincense harvest in the early morning hours, when the desert air was still cool and the harsh sun had not yet begun its daily assault on the land. Collectors would make careful incisions in the bark of the boswellia trees, allowing the aromatic resin to seep out and harden into golden tears that could be carefully gathered and graded according to their purity and fragrance. The best frankincense was so pure and aromatic that a single grain could perfume an entire room, while lower grades were still valuable for their use in religious ceremonies and medicinal preparations. The capital city of Aksum was dominated by magnificent stone obelisks, some standing over 100 feet tall, that served as monuments to the kingdom's power and the burial markers of its rulers. These obelisks, carved from single pieces of granite, were architectural marvels that required sophisticated engineering skills to quarry, transport, and erect. The largest of them weighs an estimated 520 tons, making it one of the largest single pieces of stone ever quarried and erected by ancient peoples. The process of creating these monuments was itself a testament to the advanced civilization of Aksum. Quarries located several miles from the capital provided the massive granite blocks, which were then shaped by skilled stonemasons, using techniques that remain impressive even by modern standards. The obelisks were designed to resemble multi-story buildings, complete with windows, doors, and architectural details that were carved with remarkable precision and artistic skill. Transportation of these enormous stone monuments from the quarries to the capital required a sophisticated understanding of engineering principles and the ability to organize large workforces. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Aksumites used a combination of rollers, ramps, and possibly early forms of pulleys to move these massive stones across the rugged highland terrain. The effort required would have involved hundreds of workers laboring in carefully coordinated teams, their work songs echoing across the mountains as they slowly but steadily brought these monumental stones to their final resting places. The royal palace complex in Aksum was a marvel of ancient architecture, with multi-story stone buildings that incorporated both local building traditions and influences from across the Red Sea. The ruins that survive today show evidence of sophisticated construction techniques, including the use of metal clamps to hold stone blocks together and elaborate drainage systems to channel rainwater away from the foundations. The palace buildings were decorated with carved stone panels depicting scenes from royal life, religious ceremonies, and the natural world of highland Ethiopia. Christianity came early to Aksum, arriving in the 4th century CE during the reign of King Ezana, who became one of the first rulers in the world to officially convert his kingdom to Christianity. This conversion had profound effects on Aksumite culture and architecture, as churches began to appear throughout the kingdom and Christian symbols were incorporated into royal monuments and coins. The Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, built in Aksum during this period, became one of the most important Christian pilgrimage sites in Africa and remains sacred to Ethiopian Orthodox Christians today. The adoption of Christianity in Aksum was not merely a political decision, but reflected deep spiritual currents that ran through the kingdom. Ethiopian Christianity developed its own unique characteristics, incorporating elements of local tradition while maintaining connections with the broader Christian world. Monks established monasteries in remote mountain locations, where they devoted themselves to prayer, copying manuscripts, and maintaining the scholarly traditions that would preserve Ethiopian culture through centuries of change and challenge. The written language of Aksum was Ge'ez, an ancient Semitic language that used a distinctive script adapted from South Arabian writing systems. Ge'ez inscriptions on stone monuments and royal coins provide valuable insights into Aksumite history, religion, and administration. The language was also used for religious texts, including translations of the Bible and various Christian theological works, many of which survive today in Ethiopian monasteries and provide unique insights into early Christian thought and practice. Aksumite coinage was among the most sophisticated in the ancient world, with gold, silver, and bronze coins that were accepted in markets from Egypt to India. These coins bear inscriptions in Ge'ez, Greek, and sometimes Arabic, reflecting the cosmopolitan nature of Aksumite commerce. The designs on the coins evolved over time, beginning with traditional symbols and gradually incorporating Christian crosses and religious motifs as the kingdom embraced its new faith. Agriculture in the Ethiopian highlands required sophisticated techniques to maximize productivity in a challenging environment. Aksumite farmers developed terracing systems that prevented soil erosion on steep mountain slopes while capturing and conserving scarce rainfall. They cultivated indigenous crops such as teff, a tiny grain that remains a staple of Ethiopian cuisine, as well as barley, wheat, and various legumes that could thrive in the highland climate. The rural life of Aksum moved to the rhythm of the highland seasons, with farmers timing their planting and harvesting to coincide with the arrival and departure of the monsoon rains. During the dry season, when the highlands were bathed in brilliant sunshine and the air was crystal clear, agricultural activities slowed, and many farmers turned to crafts such as weaving, pottery, and metalworking. The sound of looms and hammers provided a gentle accompaniment to daily life, while children played in the courtyards of stone houses, and elders shared stories of the kingdom's glorious past. Trade expeditions from Aksum were elaborate affairs that required months of preparation and could last for years. Caravans assembled in the capital would include hundreds of porters, guards, merchants, and animals, all organized with military precision under the leadership of experienced trade officials. The route to the coast led through landscapes of incredible diversity, from the highland plateaus with their cool temperatures and green valleys, to the harsh desert regions where water was scarce and the sun blazed with merciless intensity. The port city of Adulis on the Red Sea coast was Aksum's window to the wider world. Here, merchants from across the ancient world gathered to exchange goods and ideas in a cosmopolitan atmosphere that reflected the global reach of Aksumite commerce. Roman and Byzantine merchants brought manufactured goods, wine and silk, while Indian and Chinese traders offered spices, precious stones, and exotic fabrics. All of these goods flowed through Aksumite hands, generating the wealth that supported the kingdom's magnificent monuments and sophisticated court culture. Maritime technology in the Red Sea region was highly advanced, with ships capable of making the long journey from the African coast to India and beyond. These vessels, constructed with techniques that had been refined over centuries of experience, were designed to handle the challenging conditions of the Red Sea, with its coral reefs, unpredictable winds, and extreme temperatures. Skilled navigators used their knowledge of stars, currents, and seasonal wind patterns to guide their ships safely across waters that could be both highway and hazard. The decline of Aksum began in the 7th century CE, as new powers emerged in the region, and traditional trade routes were disrupted by political and religious changes. The rise of Islam altered the political landscape of the Red Sea region, while the emergence of new trading centers in other parts of Africa reduced Aksum's strategic importance. The kingdom gradually withdrew from its coastal territories and international trade, becoming increasingly isolated in its highland stronghold. Yet the legacy of Aksum lived on in many forms. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which traced its origins to the Aksumite conversion to Christianity, remained a powerful force in Ethiopian society and culture. The Gegese language continued to be used for religious purposes and scholarly writing, preserving an unbroken link to the kingdom's ancient past. The architectural techniques developed by Aksumite builders influenced the construction of later Ethiopian monuments, including the famous rock-hewn churches of Lalibela. Archaeological work at Aksum continues to reveal new insights into this remarkable civilization. Excavations have uncovered evidence of sophisticated urban planning, advanced metalworking techniques, and extensive international trade connections. The kingdom's coins continue to be found in archaeological sites, from Egypt to India, testifying to the far-reaching influence of Aksumite commerce. Today, the ancient obelisks of Aksum still stand as silent sentinels over the Ethiopian highlands, their carved surfaces weathered by centuries of wind and rain, but their essential majesty undiminished. They serve as reminders of a civilization that achieved remarkable prosperity and cultural sophistication through peaceful trade and diplomatic skill, leaving behind monuments that continue to inspire wonder and admiration more than a millennium after the kingdom's decline. As we continue our gentle journey through these forgotten realms, let the image of Aksum's golden age rest peacefully in your mind. The stone monuments reaching toward the sky, the caravans winding through mountain passes, the frankincense smoke rising from countless temples and churches across the ancient world. Now let us travel northward, to the steppes of Central Asia, where another remarkable kingdom once controlled the Silk Road. In the heart of Central Asia, where snow-capped mountain peaks pierce the endless blue sky and fertile river valleys cut through landscapes of breathtaking desolation and beauty, there once flourished a kingdom whose influence stretched from the Great Wall of China to the markets of Constantinople. This was Sogdiana, a collection of city-states and trading principalities that dominated the Silk Road from approximately the 3rd century BCE to the 10th century CE, becoming wealthy and powerful not through conquest, but through the patient accumulation of commercial knowledge and the careful cultivation of peaceful relationships across the known world. The Sogdians were perhaps history's greatest merchants, a people who made trade their art form and turned the dangerous mountain passes and desert routes of Central Asia into highways of prosperity. Their homeland, centered in what is now Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, encompassed the fertile valleys of the Amu Darya and Sir Darya rivers, where ancient irrigation systems created oases of green fertility in the midst of some of the world's most challenging terrain. Samarkand, and Bukhara, the greatest cities of Sogdiana, were marvels of ancient urban planning and architectural achievement. Samarkand, in particular, was renowned throughout the ancient world as a city of such beauty and prosperity that merchants would travel for months just to see its markets and monuments. The city was built around a series of hills and valleys, with flowing water channels that brought life-giving irrigation to every neighborhood, and created a network of gardens and parks that made the city seem like an earthly paradise. The bazaars of Samarkand were sensory experiences unlike anything else in the ancient world. Under the shade of elaborately decorated awnings, and within the cool confines of covered market halls, merchants from every corner of Asia gathered to buy, sell, and exchange goods that represented the finest products of human craftsmanship and natural abundance. Chinese silk hung in shimmering cascades from wooden displays, its surface catching the light like captured moonbeams. Indian spices filled the air with fragrances that could transport the imagination to distant tropical lands. Persian carpets, woven with patterns that told stories of ancient kings and mythical beasts, covered the floors and walls of merchant stalls. The process of long-distance trade in the ancient world required skills and knowledge that took a lifetime to master. Sogdian merchants were renowned for their ability to speak multiple languages, understand different currencies and weights and measures, and navigate the complex web of political relationships that could make the difference between profit and disaster. They carried with them not just goods, but information about political conditions, weather patterns, and market demands that made them valuable advisors to rulers and local officials throughout their trading territories. A typical Silk Road expedition, organized by Sogdian merchants, was a masterpiece of logistics and planning. Caravans could include hundreds of camels, horses, and pack animals, along with dozens of merchants, guards, interpreters, and servants. The preparation for such an expedition would begin months in advance, with careful attention paid to the selection of goods, the timing of departure to coincide with favorable weather and political conditions, and the recruitment of experienced personnel who could handle the challenges of desert travel and mountain crossings. The Bactrian camels used by these caravans were marvels of natural adaptation, capable of carrying heavy loads across hundreds of miles of desert terrain while requiring minimal water and food. These animals, with their thick woolly coats and distinctive double humps, could detect water sources from great distances and navigate through sandstorms that would disorient human travelers. The relationship between the Sogdian merchants and their camels was one of mutual respect and dependence, with experienced camel handlers able to read the animals' moods and needs with an accuracy that bordered on telepathy. The mountain passes that connected Central Asia with China, India, and the Mediterranean world were among the most challenging and dangerous routes in the ancient world. The Pamir Mountains, known as the roof of the world, required travelers to ascend to altitudes of over 15, where the air was thin and the weather could change from blazing sunshine to blizzard conditions within minutes. Yet Sogdian merchants navigated these passes with skill and confidence, their caravans moving in long serpentine lines across landscapes of savage beauty and deadly challenge. The sound of a Silk Road caravan in motion was a symphony of commerce and adventure. Camel bells chimed in harmony with the rhythm of hundreds of plodding feet, while merchants called to each other in a dozen languages, and guards rode alongside the column, keeping watch for bandits and wild animals. At night, when the caravan made camp in some sheltered valley or oasis, the air would be filled with the sounds of different cultures mingling together: Chinese flutes, Persian poetry, Indian religious chants, and the universal languages of laughter and shared stories around countless small campfires. Sogdian cities were not just commercial centers, but also remarkable cultural melting pots, where ideas, religions, and artistic traditions from across the known world came together to create something entirely new and beautiful. The architecture of Samarkand and Bukhara reflected this cosmopolitan character, with buildings that incorporated Greek columns, Persian arches, Chinese roof tiles, and Indian decorative motifs in harmonious combinations that seemed to capture the very essence of cultural synthesis. The religious life of Sogdiana was as diverse as its commercial activities. Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and various local traditions coexisted peacefully within Sogdian cities, with temples, monasteries, fire altars, and churches standing side by side in neighborhoods where merchants of every faith conducted their daily business. This religious tolerance was not merely a matter of practical convenience, but reflected a deep Sogdian belief that truth could be found in many forms, and that prosperity came through acceptance rather than conflict. The Sogdian language became the lingua franca of Silk Road trade, with merchants from China to Constantinople learning to speak and write Sogdian in order to conduct business more effectively. The language was written in a distinctive script, adapted from Aramaic, and Sogdian documents have been found in archaeological sites, from the Gobi Desert to the banks of the Volga River, testifying to the extraordinary reach of Sogdian commercial and cultural influence. One of the most remarkable aspects of Sogdian civilization was the role played by women in long-distance trade. Unlike many ancient societies, Sogdiana allowed women to own property, conduct business independently, and even lead trading expeditions. Archaeological evidence from Sogdian sites has revealed documents written by female merchants who managed complex business operations spanning thousands of miles while maintaining correspondence with trading partners across multiple continents. The daily life of wealthy Sogdian merchants was one of comfortable prosperity. Lived in houses built around central courtyards, where fountains provided cooling water and fruit trees offered shade during the heat of summer days. These homes were decorated with elaborate wall paintings that depicted scenes from daily life, religious ceremonies, and mythological stories, drawn from the various cultures that met and mingled in Sogdian cities. The paintings, executed in brilliant colors that have retained their vibrancy after more than a millennium, show banqueting scenes, hunting expeditions, and religious processions that provide invaluable insights into the sophisticated lifestyle of this remarkable civilization. The art of hospitality was refined to an extraordinary degree in Sogdian society, reflecting both the practical needs of long-distance merchants, who required safe lodging, and the cultural values of people who understood that prosperity came through peaceful cooperation rather than aggressive competition. Caravanserais, the elaborate inns that served traveling merchants, were architectural marvels that combined comfort, security, and beauty in ways that made them destinations in their own right. These caravanserais were typically built around large central courtyards where caravans could be securely parked and animals could be fed and watered. The perimeter of the courtyard was lined with rooms and suites that could accommodate merchants of varying levels of wealth and importance, from simple chambers with basic amenities to elaborate apartments fitted with every luxury that the ancient world could provide. The best caravanserais included bathhouses, libraries, chapels representing multiple faiths, and dining halls where merchants could enjoy cuisine that reflected the international character of Silk Road trade. The cuisine of Sogdiana was itself a reflection of the kingdom's cosmopolitan character, incorporating ingredients and cooking techniques from across Asia. Chinese tea ceremonies were conducted with Persian etiquette, while Indian spices were used to prepare dishes that were served according to Greek customs of hospitality. The royal kitchens of Samarkand were said to employ cooks from a dozen different countries, each contributing their own culinary traditions to create fusion cuisine that predated modern concepts of international cooking by more than 1,000 years. Sogdian textile production was renowned throughout the ancient world, with silk weavers who had learned their techniques from Chinese masters but developed their own distinctive styles and patterns. Sogdian silk was prized not just for its quality, but for its unique designs that incorporated motifs from multiple cultures: Chinese dragons dancing with Persian peacocks, Greek geometric patterns intertwined with Indian lotus flowers, all executed in colors that seemed to capture the very essence of sunset over the Central Asian steppes. The workshops where these textiles were produced were quiet, meditative places where skilled artisans worked with concentration and dedication that bordered on the spiritual. The sound of looms created a gentle, rhythmic background music that seemed to harmonize with the natural rhythms of daily life, while the sorting and preparation of silk threads required a delicacy of touch and precision of vision that was passed down through generations of craftspeople who took enormous pride in their work. Education in Sogdiana was highly valued, with schools and libraries that served not just local needs but attracted students from across the Silk Road network. Young Sogdians were trained not just in the practical skills of commerce, languages, mathematics, geography, and diplomatic protocols, but also in literature, philosophy, and the arts. The ideal Sogdian merchant was expected to be not just successful in business, but cultured and educated in ways that would allow him or her to move comfortably in any society, from the Chinese imperial court to the palaces of Byzantine emperors. The astronomical and mathematical knowledge accumulated by Sogdian scholars was essential for navigation and calendar keeping in a civilization that depended on precise timing for successful long-distance trade. Sogdian astronomers developed sophisticated instruments for measuring the positions of stars and planets, while their mathematicians created calculation systems that allowed merchants to work with the complex exchange rates and measurement systems used across the diverse regions of the Silk Road. Music and dance in Sogdiana reflected the same international influences that characterized every other aspect of the civilization. Court entertainments could feature Chinese musicians playing Persian melodies on Indian instruments, while dancers performed choreography that incorporated movements from the various cultures represented in Sogdian society. These performances were not mere entertainment, but sophisticated artistic expressions that helped to create and maintain the cultural synthesis that was the essence of Sogdian civilizations. The decline of Sogdiana began in the 8th century CE, as political changes across Central Asia disrupted the stable conditions that had allowed the kingdom to prosper for so many centuries. The Arab conquest of Central Asia brought new rulers who were less tolerant of religious diversity and less supportive of the merchant culture that had been the foundation of Sogdian prosperity. At the same time, changes in maritime technology made sea routes more competitive with overland trade, gradually reducing the importance of the Silk Road and the cities that had grown wealthy serving it. The final blow to Sogdian independence came with the Mongol invasions of the 13th century, when the great cities of Samarkand and Bukhara were destroyed and their populations scattered. Yet even in destruction, the Sogdian legacy lived on. Many Sogdian merchants and scholars found refuge in other parts of Asia, where they continued to practice their trades and preserve their cultural traditions. The Sogdian language continued to be used for commercial documents for several more centuries, while Sogdian artistic and architectural influences can be traced in monuments and artworks across the former extent of their trading empire. Archaeological excavations in former Sogdian territories continue to reveal new evidence of this remarkable civilization's achievements. Buried treasure hoards containing coins from dozens of different kingdoms, manuscripts written in multiple languages and scripts, and artwork that shows the sophisticated fusion of different cultural traditions all testify to the extraordinary success of the Sogdian experiment in peaceful international cooperation and cultural synthesis. Today, the ruins of Sogdian cities still dot the landscape of Central Asia, their weathered walls and foundations serving as silent reminders of a civilization that proved prosperity could be achieved through commerce rather than conquest, through cooperation rather than conflict. The modern cities of Samarkand and Bukhara, now in Uzbekistan, continue to celebrate their Sogdian heritage, preserving architectural monuments and cultural traditions that provide tangible links to one of history's most successful trading civilizations. As we continue our peaceful journey through these forgotten realms, let the memory of Sogdiana's merchants rest gently in your thoughts, those patient, skilled traders who crossed deserts and mountains with their precious cargoes, creating networks of exchange that connected the entire known world in webs of mutual prosperity and cultural understanding. Now let us travel to the remote islands of Southeast Asia, where another maritime kingdom once ruled the spice-scented seas. In the warm, tropical waters of the Indonesian archipelago, where thousands of emerald islands rise from coral seas, and monsoon winds carry the scent of exotic spices across vast distances, there once flourished the greatest maritime empire in Southeast Asian history. This was Majapahit, a Hindu-Buddhist kingdom that dominated the region from the late 13th to the early 16th centuries, ruling over an empire that stretched from the Malay Peninsula to the eastern reaches of Indonesia, creating a golden age of culture, commerce, and peaceful prosperity that would be remembered for centuries after its decline. The Kingdom of Majapahit emerged in East Java in 1293 CE, founded by Raden Vijaya in the fertile valley of the Brantas River. The capital city, also called Majapahit, was built on a site carefully chosen for its strategic advantages, located inland enough to be protected from naval attack, yet connected by navigable rivers to the sea, allowing the easy movement of goods and people between the interior agricultural regions and the coastal ports that served the kingdom's far-flung maritime empire. The city of Majapahit was a marvel of tropical urban planning, designed to work in harmony with the natural environment of Java rather than imposing foreign architectural concepts on the landscape. The royal palace complex was built around a series of courtyards and gardens where tropical flowers bloomed in carefully planned sequences, ensuring that the air was always perfumed with jasmine, frangipani, or other fragrant blossoms. Artificial ponds and canals provided both practical water management and aesthetic beauty, their surfaces reflecting the ornate carved facades of palace buildings and creating an atmosphere of serene magnificence. The wealth of Majapahit came from its control of the spice trade, but unlike earlier kingdoms that had served primarily as intermediaries, Majapahit actually controlled many of the islands where the most valuable spices grew. The Moluccas, known as the Spice Islands, were the only place in the world where nutmeg and cloves grew naturally, and Majapahit's naval power allowed the kingdom to maintain monopolistic control over these precious commodities for more than 2 centuries. The cultivation and harvesting of spices in the Moluccas was an ancient art that required intimate knowledge of local conditions and careful attention to timing and technique. Nutmeg trees, which could live for hundreds of years, produced their precious fruit only after decades of careful nurturing. The trees required specific soil conditions, particular amounts of rainfall, and protection from strong winds, making their cultivation as much art as agriculture. The harvest itself was a community celebration, with entire villages participating in the careful gathering and processing of the aromatic seeds that would eventually flavor the food and incense of distant continents. Clove trees were even more demanding in their requirements, growing only in the volcanic soil of certain Indonesian islands, and requiring a perfectly balanced tropical climate, with specific patterns of rainfall and humidity. The harvesting of cloves required precise timing. The flower buds had to be picked at exactly the right moment when they had developed their full aromatic intensity, but before they opened into flowers. This timing could vary from tree to tree, and required experienced harvesters who could judge the perfect moment for each individual plant. The naval technology that allowed Majapahit to control such a vast maritime empire was highly sophisticated, representing centuries of accumulated knowledge about ship design, navigation, and seamanship in tropical waters. Majapahit vessels, known as jong, were among the largest ships in the medieval world, capable of carrying several hundred passengers and crew members, along with massive cargoes of trade goods. These ships were constructed using advanced techniques, that included flexible lashing systems designed to allow the hull to flex with ocean waves rather than fighting against them, making them incredibly seaworthy in the often turbulent waters of the Indonesian archipelago. The crews of these ships were skilled professionals who understood not just the technical aspects of sailing, but also the complex patterns of monsoon winds, ocean currents, and seasonal weather that determined the timing and routing of trading expeditions. Navigation was accomplished through a combination of astronomical observation, careful attention to wind and wave patterns, and an intimate knowledge of the countless islands, reefs, and channels that made up the Indonesian seascape. The most skilled navigators could determine their position and plot their course using only the flight patterns of seabirds, the color and temperature of ocean water, and the direction of swells that might have originated hundreds of miles away. Religious life in Majapahit was characterized by the same harmonious synthesis that marked other aspects of the civilization. Hinduism and Buddhism coexisted peacefully with local animistic traditions, creating a unique form of spirituality that saw the divine in every aspect of the natural world. Temples were built not as monuments to human power, but as places where people could commune with the spiritual forces that governed the cycles of nature and the rhythms of daily life. The great temple complex of Trowulan, near the capital city, was the spiritual heart of the kingdom, containing dozens of individual temples, shrines, and meditation halls set within beautifully landscaped gardens, where streams, ponds, and carefully planned groves of sacred trees created an environment conducive to spiritual reflection and religious ceremony. The architecture of these temples reflected the tropical environment, with open-sided halls that allowed air to circulate freely and courtyards designed to channel cooling breezes throughout the complex. The Nagara Tagama, an epic poem written by the court poet Mpu Prapanka in the 14th century, provides a detailed picture of life in Majapahit at the height of its power and prosperity. The poem describes a kingdom where prosperity and peace were the natural results of wise governance and harmonious relationships between rulers and subjects. According to Prapanka's account, the kingdom included over 100 tributary states spread across the Indonesian archipelago, each maintaining its own local customs and traditions while participating in the larger political and economic system that connected all parts of the empire. Daily life for the common people of Majapahit was lived in close harmony with the natural rhythms of tropical agriculture and the monsoon seasons that governed both farming and maritime trade. Rice cultivation was the foundation of the kingdom's agricultural economy, with elaborate irrigation systems that transformed the river valleys of Java into some of the most productive farmland in Southeast Asia. These irrigation systems, known as subak, were managed by religious organizations that combined practical water management with spiritual ceremonies designed to ensure harmony between human needs and natural processes. The rice terraces of Majapahit were works of art as well as agricultural infrastructure, carved into hillsides with mathematical precision that created not only efficient water distribution, but also landscapes of extraordinary beauty. During the growing season, these terraces formed vast green staircases that seemed to climb toward the sky, while during the harvest season, they became golden cascades of ripe grain that rustled gently in the tropical breezes. Village life in the Majapahit countryside revolved around collective labor and mutual cooperation, with agricultural tasks organized according to traditional systems that ensured every family had access to adequate farmland and water resources, while contributing their fair share to community projects and obligations. The rice harvest was a time of particular celebration, with entire villages working together to bring in the crop, followed by festivals that combined thanksgiving for the year's abundance with religious ceremonies that honored the rice goddess Dewi Sri and other deities associated with agricultural prosperity. Craftsmanship in Majapahit reached levels of extraordinary sophistication, particularly in the working of metals, wood, and textiles. The kingdom's goldsmiths and silversmiths created jewelry and decorative objects of incredible delicacy and beauty, using techniques that had been refined over generations of artistic development. Traditional Javanese techniques for working precious metals were combined with influences from India, China, and the Islamic world to create distinctive styles that were uniquely Majapahit, while drawing from the best traditions of Asian craftsmanship. Woodcarving was another art form that reached remarkable heights during the Majapahit period, with craftsmen creating architectural details, furniture, and sculptural works that combined technical mastery with profound spiritual and aesthetic sensibility. The tropical hardwoods available in Java provided carvers with materials of exceptional beauty and durability, while the Hindu-Buddhist artistic tradition offered a rich vocabulary of symbolic and decorative motifs that could be adapted to everything from temple doors to royal furniture. Textile production in Majapahit was renowned throughout Southeast Asia, with Javanese batik reaching levels of artistic and technical achievement that have never been surpassed. The creation of batik textiles was a slow, meditative process that required enormous skill and patience, with designs built up through multiple applications of wax resist and dye that could take months to complete for the most elaborate pieces. The patterns used in Majapahit batik incorporated symbolic elements from Hindu and Buddhist tradition, along with geometric and floral motifs that reflected the natural beauty of the tropical environment. The royal court of Majapahit was renowned for its sophistication and cultural refinement, attracting artists, scholars, and diplomats from across Southeast Asia and beyond. Court ceremonies were elaborate affairs that could continue for weeks, featuring traditional dance performances, poetry recitations, and dramatic presentations that combined entertainment with religious and political significance. These events were not merely displays of royal power, but were understood as essential rituals that maintained the harmony between earthly and spiritual realms that was believed necessary for the kingdom's continued prosperity. The gamelan orchestras that provided music for these court ceremonies were among the most sophisticated musical ensembles in the world, using bronze instruments tuned according to ancient mathematical principles that created harmonics and resonances of extraordinary beauty and complexity. The music of the gamelan was not merely entertainment, but was understood as a form of meditation and spiritual practice that could induce states of consciousness conducive to wisdom and enlightenment. Literature and scholarship flourished under Majapahit patronage, with court poets and scholars creating works in Old Javanese that drew from Sanskrit sources while developing distinctively Indonesian forms and themes. The Majapahit court maintained extensive libraries containing manuscripts in multiple languages, while scholars engaged in sophisticated theological and philosophical discussions that contributed to the ongoing development of Southeast Asian intellectual culture. The legal system of Majapahit was based on a combination of Hindu Dharma Shastra tradition and local customary law, creating a flexible framework that could accommodate the diverse cultural traditions found throughout the kingdom's extensive territories. Legal codes were written in Old Javanese and distributed to provincial governors and local rulers, while a system of appeals ensured that justice could be sought even by common people who felt they had been wronged by local officials. Women in Majapahit society enjoyed considerable freedom and legal rights compared to women in many other medieval civilizations. Archaeological evidence and literary sources suggest that women could own property, engage in trade, and participate in religious ceremonies with few restrictions. Some women achieved positions of considerable political influence, including Queen Tribhuwana Wijaya Tunggadewi, who ruled the kingdom in her own right during the 14th century, and was remembered as one of its most capable and benevolent monarchs. The decline of Majapahit began in the late 15th century, as the arrival of Islam in Indonesia gradually altered the religious and political landscape of the archipelago. Unlike the violent conquests that had destroyed other kingdoms, the Islamization of Indonesia was largely a peaceful process that occurred through trade contacts, intermarriage, and gradual cultural change. Many Javanese rulers converted to Islam while maintaining many of their traditional cultural practices, creating syncretic forms of Indonesian Islam that preserved much of the earlier Hindu-Buddhist heritage. The final collapse of Majapahit came in the early 16th century as the kingdom fragmented into smaller sultanates and principalities that were unable to maintain the unified political structure that had made the empire possible. The arrival of European colonizers in the region further disrupted traditional political and economic patterns, gradually bringing an end to the era of independent Southeast Asian maritime empires. Yet the cultural legacy of Majapahit lived on, in many forms, throughout Indonesian society. The artistic traditions developed during the kingdom's golden age continued to evolve and develop, while the legal and administrative systems established by Majapahit rulers provided foundations for later political developments. The Indonesian national motto, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, unity in diversity, comes from an old Javanese poem from the Majapahit period, reflecting the kingdom's successful model of governing a diverse multicultural empire through tolerance and respect for local traditions. Archaeological work at the site of the ancient capital continues to reveal new insights into the sophistication and complexity of Majapahit civilization. Excavations have uncovered evidence of advanced urban planning, sophisticated water management systems, and extensive trade networks that connected Majapahit with civilizations across Asia and beyond. The terracotta sculptures and architectural remains found at these sites demonstrate artistic achievement of the highest caliber, while inscriptions and manuscripts provide detailed information about the kingdom's political, religious, and social institutions. Today, the cultural traditions of Majapahit continue to influence Indonesian society in countless ways, from the gamelan music that remains central to Javanese cultural identity, to the batik textiles that are recognized by UNESCO as masterpieces of human cultural heritage. The kingdom's example of successful multicultural governance and religious tolerance provides inspiration for modern Indonesia's ongoing efforts to maintain unity and prosperity in one of the world's most diverse nations. As our journey through these peaceful realms continues, let the memory of Majapahit's golden age settle gently in your consciousness. The image of spice-laden ships sailing through tropical seas, of rice terraces climbing toward clouded mountains, of gamelan music drifting through palace courtyards, where frangipani blossoms perfume the warm evening air. Now let us travel across the Pacific Ocean to another forgotten kingdom, where Polynesian navigators once ruled vast territories of ocean and coral. In the vast blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean, where countless islands dot the waters like scattered jewels and the horizon seems to stretch into infinity, there once existed a maritime empire that spanned thousands of miles of open ocean and demonstrated the remarkable navigational skills and seafaring culture of the Polynesian people. This was the Tongan Empire, also known as the Tui Tonga Empire, which, from approximately the 10th to the 15th centuries CE, controlled much of what is now Fiji, Samoa, parts of the Cook Islands, and other scattered island groups, creating a unique form of ocean-based civilization that achieved prosperity and cultural sophistication through mastery of wind, wave, and star. The Kingdom of Tonga was centered on the island group that still bears its name, located in the heart of Polynesia, where the deep blue waters of the Pacific create a natural highway for skilled navigators, willing to trust their lives to outrigger canoes and double-hulled sailing vessels. The main island of Tonga Tapu served as the political and ceremonial center of the empire, its coral atolls and volcanic peaks providing both practical harbors for the great voyaging canoes and sacred sites where the elaborate ceremonies that maintained the kingdom's spiritual and political authority could be conducted. The political structure of Tonga was unlike anything found elsewhere in the ancient world, based on a complex system of sacred kingship that combined practical political authority with religious and ceremonial functions that connected earthly rulers to the spiritual forces governing the ocean and the sky. The Tui Tonga, or sacred king, was believed to be descended from the gods themselves, possessing mana, spiritual power, that could ensure favorable winds for voyaging, abundant catches for fishermen, and protection from the storms and other natural disasters that could devastate island communities. The royal residence on Tongatapu was built according to ancient traditions that reflected both the maritime nature of Tongan civilization and the sacred character of royal authority. The Great House, or Fail, was constructed without nails or other metal fasteners, using traditional lashing techniques that created structures flexible enough to withstand the powerful winds of Pacific storms, while maintaining the architectural dignity appropriate to royal functions. The building was oriented according to astronomical principles that aligned it with the rising and setting points of important stars used in navigation, making the royal residence itself a kind of giant navigational instrument. The basis of Tongan wealth and power was the kingdom's mastery of ocean voyaging, which allowed Tongan navigators to maintain regular contact with islands scattered across thousands of miles of open ocean. These voyages were not random explorations but carefully planned expeditions that followed established routes and seasonal patterns developed over centuries of maritime experience. The success of these voyages depended on navigational skills that have been called among the most sophisticated in human history, combining astronomical knowledge, understanding of ocean currents and wave patterns, and an almost supernatural ability to sense the presence of distant land masses. The great voyaging canoes of Tonga were marvels of Pacific naval architecture, designed to carry substantial crews and cargo loads across thousands of miles of open ocean, while remaining seaworthy in conditions that would challenge much larger vessels. The largest of these canoes, the Kalia, could reach lengths of over 100 feet and were constructed from carefully selected woods, using techniques that had been refined over generations of canoe building tradition. The hulls were carved from single tree trunks when possible, then extended with additional planks that were fitted and lashed with such precision that the finished vessels were both watertight and flexible enough to bend with ocean swells, rather than breaking under stress. The sails used on these vessels were woven from pandanus leaves according to techniques that created lightweight, yet incredibly strong fabric, capable of driving the canoes at speeds that amazed European observers when they first encountered Tongan vessels in the 18th century. The weaving of these sails was traditionally women's work, requiring skills that were passed down through families and refined through generations of experience. The finished sails were not just functional equipment, but works of art decorated with geometric patterns that had both aesthetic and symbolic significance. Navigation in the open Pacific required knowledge and skills that were among the most sophisticated achievements of pre-industrial civilization. Tongan navigators learned to read the subtle signs that indicated the presence of distant islands, the behavior of seabirds, the color and temperature of ocean water, the direction and character of swells that might have originated hundreds of miles away from land masses. They memorized the rising and setting points of dozens of stars and could determine their position and plot their course using only celestial observations and their accumulated knowledge of ocean conditions. The training of navigators was a lengthy and rigorous process that began in childhood and continued throughout a navigator's career. Young men selected for this training learned not just the technical aspects of navigation, but also the cultural and spiritual traditions that surrounded voyaging in Tongan society. Navigation was understood not merely as a practical skill, but as a form of communion with the spiritual forces that governed the ocean and the sky, requiring personal qualities of courage, wisdom, and spiritual sensitivity that were developed through years of careful instruction and practical experience. The social organization of voyaging expeditions reflected the hierarchical nature of Tongan society, with each crew member having specific responsibilities and social status that determined their position and duties during the voyage. The navigator held the highest position, followed by the captain, who was responsible for the practical management of the vessel and crew, while ordinary crew members were assigned duties according to their experience and capabilities. Women sometimes participated in voyaging expeditions, particularly those involving trade or ceremonial visits to allied islands, and could achieve positions of considerable responsibility and authority. Daily life aboard a voyaging canoe during one of these long Pacific crossings required careful attention to the conservation of food and fresh water, along with the maintenance of crew morale and discipline during what could be weeks or months of challenging ocean travel. The crew's diet consisted primarily of preserved foods that could withstand the salt air and humid conditions of the open ocean, dried fish, fermented breadfruit paste, coconuts that provided both food and drink, and various other foods that had been specially prepared for long ocean voyages. The rhythm of life aboard the canoes was governed by the daily cycle of navigation and sailing, with crew members taking turns at the various duties required to keep the vessel moving safely toward its destination. During the day, navigators would take frequent observations of the sun's position and the direction of wind and waves, while at night they would study the stars and listen to the subtle changes in the sound of wind and water that could indicate changing weather conditions or proximity to land. Trade was the practical foundation of the Tongan Empire, with voyaging expeditions carrying goods and materials between islands that specialized in different forms of production. Some islands were renowned for their fine mats woven from pandanus leaves, others for their carved wooden bowls and other utensils, while still others produced the red feathers, shells, and other materials that were essential for ceremonial and decorative purposes throughout the Pacific. The most valuable trade goods were often those with ceremonial or spiritual significance, such as the whale teeth that were essential for important social ceremonies, or the specially prepared kava that was used in religious rituals. The exchange of goods was rarely a simple commercial transaction, but was embedded in complex social and ceremonial relationships that reinforced the political and cultural ties that held the empire together. Trading voyages included elaborate ceremonial exchanges where gifts were presented according to strict protocols that reflected the relative status of the participating chiefs and communities. These ceremonies could continue for days or weeks, with feasting, dancing, and other cultural performances that strengthened the bonds between allied communities while conducting the practical business of trade. Kava culture was central to Tongan social and religious life, with the preparation and consumption of this mildly narcotic beverage serving important functions in maintaining social harmony and conducting important business. The kava ceremony was a highly ritualized process that required specific knowledge and skills, with different grades and preparations of the root being used for different social occasions. The ceremony itself was a form of meditation and social bonding that helped to resolve conflicts, make important decisions, and maintain the complex web of relationships that connected individuals and communities throughout the empire. Religion in Tonga was closely connected to the ocean and the practical needs of a maritime civilization, with deities and spirits associated with navigation, fishing, and the other activities essential for survival and prosperity in the island environment. Temples were built on prominent locations overlooking the ocean, where priests could conduct ceremonies to ensure favorable conditions for voyaging and fishing, while maintaining the spiritual connections that were believed essential for the kingdom's continued prosperity. The most important religious ceremonies were those associated with the investiture and ritual activities of the Tui Tonga, who served as the intermediary between the human and spiritual worlds. These ceremonies, conducted at specific times determined by astronomical observations, included elaborate presentations of food and other gifts from throughout the empire, along with cultural performances that demonstrated the artistic achievements and cultural vitality of the various island communities that acknowledged Tongan authority. Artistic expression in Tonga reached its highest development in the creation of fine mats, known as tauvala, which were woven from the finest pandanus fibers, using techniques that produced textiles of extraordinary beauty and durability. The creation of these mats was a highly skilled process that could take months or years to complete, with the finest examples being reserved for ceremonial use by the highest-ranking chiefs and members of the royal family. The patterns woven into these mats had both decorative and symbolic significance, telling stories of family history, political alliances, and spiritual beliefs that were essential to Tongan cultural identity. Dance and music were also highly developed art forms in Tongan society, with elaborate performances that combined physical skill, artistic expression, and spiritual significance. The traditional dances of Tonga told stories of navigation and voyaging, of encounters with supernatural beings, and of the heroic deeds of legendary chiefs and navigators. The music that accompanied these dances was produced using traditional instruments, including drums made from hollowed logs, flutes carved from bamboo, and various percussion instruments that created complex rhythms that seemed to echo the sound of waves against coral reefs. The oral tradition of Tonga preserved an enormous body of knowledge about navigation, history, genealogy, and cultural practices that was essential for maintaining the continuity of civilization across the scattered islands of the empire. Master storytellers, who held positions of great respect in Tongan society, were responsible for memorizing and transmitting this knowledge to new generations through formal instruction and public performances. The stories they told were not just entertainment, but were recognized as essential repositories of the practical and cultural knowledge that made island civilization possible. The decline of the Tongan Empire began in the 15th century as changes in ocean conditions, political developments on various islands, and possibly climate change disrupted the stable patterns that had allowed the kingdom to flourish for several centuries. The arrival of European explorers and missionaries in the 18th and 19th centuries brought additional challenges that ultimately led to the transformation of traditional Tongan society and the end of the old maritime empire. Yet the legacy of the Tongan Empire lives on in many ways throughout modern Polynesia. Traditional navigation techniques, preserved by a handful of master navigators, have been revived in recent decades and are once again being used for long-distance voyaging between Pacific islands. The traditional arts of mat weaving, wood carving, and ceremonial performance continue to be practiced and have achieved international recognition as important expressions of Pacific Island culture. The modern Kingdom of Tonga, which remains one of the few Pacific Island nations never to have been fully colonized by European powers, continues to honor the traditions and achievements of the ancient empire while adapting to the challenges and opportunities of the contemporary world. The constitutional monarchy that governs Tonga today traces its legitimacy directly back to the Tonga line, maintaining an unbroken connection to the maritime empire that once dominated the Central Pacific. Archaeological work throughout the former extent of the Tongan Empire continues to reveal new evidence of the sophistication and extent of this remarkable Pacific civilization. Ancient ceremonial sites, traditional canoe-building locations, and other archaeological remains provide physical evidence of the cultural and political achievements of the Tui Tonga period, while ongoing research into traditional navigation techniques and oral histories continues to deepen our understanding of how Pacific Island peoples achieved such remarkable success in one of the world's most challenging environments. As our peaceful journey through these forgotten realms continues, let the memory of Tonga's great navigators settle gently in your thoughts. Inul bisay semendo, in your thoughts mind hu, begin, crossing vast expanses of blue ocean, their crews guided by stars and wave patterns that spoke to them with the clarity of ancient wisdom, creating connections across thousands of miles of water that bound scattered island communities into a single, harmonious empire. Now let us travel to the highlands of South America, where another remarkable kingdom once flourished among mountain peaks and cloud forests high in the Andes Mountains of South America. On a plateau so elevated that the air grows thin and the sky seems close enough to touch, there once flourished a civilization that achieved remarkable prosperity and cultural sophistication in one of the world's most challenging environments. This was Tiwanaku, also known as Tiwanaku, a kingdom that dominated the Altiplano region around Lake Titicaca from approximately 300 to 1000, creating architectural monuments of breathtaking grandeur and developing agricultural techniques that sustained large populations at altitudes where most crops cannot grow. The kingdom of Tiwanaku was centered around the sacred Lake Titicaca, the highest navigable lake in the world, whose deep blue waters stretch across the landscape like a piece of sky fallen to earth. At an elevation of over 12,500 feet above sea level, the region presents challenges that would seem insurmountable to most civilizations. Extreme temperature variations between day and night, intense solar radiation due to the thin atmosphere, and a growing season so short that only specially adapted crops can survive the frequent frosts that can occur even in summer months. Yet the people of Tiwanaku not only survived in this harsh environment, but created one of the most sophisticated civilizations in the ancient Americas, building monuments that rival any in the world, and developing agricultural innovations that continue to influence Andean farming practices today. The secret of their success lay in their profound understanding of the highland environment and their ability to work with, rather than against, the natural conditions of the Altiplano. The capital city of Tiwanaku was built on the southern shore of Lake Titicaca, its massive stone structures rising from the plateau like ancient mountains themselves. The city was designed according to astronomical principles that aligned its major buildings with the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, creating a sacred landscape where earthly architecture harmonized with celestial rhythms. The most impressive of these structures was the Ikapana Pyramid, a stepped monument that rose over 50 feet above the surrounding plain and was built with such precision that its stones fit together without mortar, yet have withstood centuries of earthquakes and harsh weather conditions. The Ikapana Pyramid was more than just an impressive architectural achievement. It was designed as a sophisticated water management system that collected rainwater and channeled it through internal conduits in ways that created symbolic representations of the mountain watersheds that fed Lake Titicaca. The pyramid's 7 terraced levels represented the different ecological zones of the Andes, from the high Puna grasslands to the lower valleys, while the water flowing through its channels symbolized the life-giving streams that sustained all highland communities. The construction of these massive stone monuments required engineering skills and organizational capabilities that rival any ancient civilization. The stones used in Tiwanaku's buildings were quarried from sites located miles away and transported across difficult terrain, using techniques that remain partially mysterious today. Some of the largest stones weigh over 100 tons, yet they were moved and positioned with precision that demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of leverage, momentum, and coordinated human effort. The daily work of quarrying and transporting these massive stones would have required the coordinated efforts of thousands of workers, their activities organized according to seasonal patterns that took advantage of favorable weather conditions and the agricultural calendar that governed highland life. The sound of stone hammers and chisels would have echoed across the plateau for decades as craftsmen slowly shaped these monuments, their patient work creating architectural marvels that seemed to grow from the landscape itself like natural geological formations. The people of Tiwanaku developed remarkable innovations in highland agriculture that allowed them to support large populations in an environment that seemed hostile to farming. Their most important achievement was the creation of raised field systems known as waru, which used sophisticated hydraulic engineering to create microclimates that protected crops from frost while providing drainage during the rainy season and irrigation during dry periods. These raised fields were constructed by excavating networks of canals and using the earth to create elevated planting surfaces that rose several feet above the surrounding water level. During the day, water in the canals absorbed heat from the intense high-altitude sunshine, then released this heat during the cold nights, creating temperature moderation that could prevent frost damage to crops even when surrounding areas experienced freezing temperatures. The construction and maintenance of these agricultural systems required intimate knowledge of local weather patterns. soil conditions, and water management techniques that were passed down through generations of highland farmers. The work was done primarily during the dry season, when entire communities would collaborate on expanding and maintaining the field systems that supported their survival in this challenging environment. The crops grown in these raised fields were specially adapted to high-altitude conditions, including potatoes, quinoa, and other indigenous Andean plants that could thrive in the intense sunlight and thin air of the Altiplano. The potato varieties, developed by Tiwanaku farmers, numbered in the hundreds, each adapted to specific soil and climate conditions, creating genetic diversity that provided insurance against crop failures and allowed for reliable food production despite the unpredictable weather conditions of the highlands. The process of potato cultivation in the Altiplano required techniques that seemed almost magical in their ability to coax abundant harvests from soil and climate that appeared barren and hostile. Farmers learned to read subtle signs in the behavior of plants, animals, and weather that allowed them to time their planting and harvesting activities for maximum success, while also developing food preservation techniques that could store the harvest through years of scarcity. The freeze-drying technique used to preserve potatoes, known as chunyo, involved exposing the tubers to the natural cycle of freezing nights and sunny days that characterized the Altiplano climate. The potatoes would be spread on the ground during the cold season, allowing them to freeze solid each night, then trampled and squeezed to remove moisture during the warm daylight hours. After several repetitions of this process, the potatoes were transformed into lightweight, shelf-stable food that could be stored for years without spoilage. Lake Titicaca itself played a central role in Tiwanaku's civilization, providing not only fish and waterfowl that supplemented the highland diet, but also serving as the spiritual center of their cosmological beliefs. The lake was considered sacred by the Tiwanaku people, who believed it was the birthplace of the sun and the origin point of human civilization. According to their mythology, the creator god Viracocha emerged from the depths of Lake Titicaca to create the world and establish the order of human society. The islands scattered throughout Lake Titicaca were considered especially sacred, serving as pilgrimage destinations where elaborate ceremonies were conducted to honor the deities and ancestors who were believed to dwell in the lake's depths. The largest of these islands, known today as the Island of the Sun and the Island of the Moon, contained temples and ceremonial structures that were maintained by priests and attended by pilgrims from throughout the Tiwanaku realm. Transportation across the lake was accomplished using boats made from totara reeds, which grew abundantly in the shallow areas along the shoreline. These boats, constructed using techniques that have remained virtually unchanged for over 1,000 years, were marvels of indigenous engineering that could carry substantial loads while remaining lightweight enough to be easily maneuvered in the lake's sometimes rough waters. The freeze-drying technique used to preserve potatoes, known as chunyo, involved exposing the tubers to the natural cycle of freezing nights and sunny days that characterized the Altiplano climate. The potatoes would be spread on the ground during the cold season, allowing them to freeze solid each night, then trampled and squeezed to remove moisture during the warm daylight hours. After several repetitions of this process, the potatoes were transformed into lightweight, shelf-stable food that could be stored for years without spoilage. Lake Titicaca itself played a central role in Tiwanaku's civilization, providing not only fish and waterfowl that supplemented the highland diet, but also serving as the spiritual center of their cosmological beliefs. The lake was considered sacred by the Tiwanaku people, who believed it was the birthplace of the sun and the origin point of human civilization. According to their mythology, the creator god Viracocha emerged from the depths of Lake Titicaca to create the world and establish the order of human society. The islands scattered throughout Lake Titicaca were considered especially sacred, serving as pilgrimage destinations where elaborate ceremonies were conducted to honor the deities and ancestors who were believed to dwell in the lake's depths. The largest of these islands, known today as the Island of the Sun and the Island of the Moon, contained temples and ceremonial structures that were maintained by priests and attended by pilgrims from throughout the Tiwanaku realm. Transportation across the lake was accomplished using boats made from totara reeds, which grew abundantly in the shallow areas along the shoreline. These boats, constructed using techniques that have remained virtually unchanged for over 1,000 years, were marvels of indigenous engineering that could carry substantial loads while remaining lightweight enough to be easily maneuvered in the lake's sometimes rough waters. The construction of Totoro boats required skills that were passed down through families of specialized boat builders who understood the subtle characteristics of different reed varieties and the techniques needed to bind them into vessels that were both seaworthy and durable. The boats were constructed without any nails or other metal fasteners, using only the reeds themselves and traditional cordage made from highland plants, yet they could last for months of heavy use before requiring replacement. The religious and ceremonial life of Tiwanaku centered around elaborate rituals that honored the deities associated with weather, agriculture, and the spiritual forces that governed highland life. The most important of these ceremonies were conducted at the ceremonial complex of Kalasasaya, a rectangular enclosure surrounded by massive stone pillars that served as a giant astronomical calendar capable of tracking the movements of the sun and moon with remarkable precision. The ceremonies conducted at Kalasasaya were timed to coincide with important astronomical events, such as the solstices and equinoxes, when the alignment of the sun with specific architectural features created dramatic lighting effects that emphasized the connection between earthly and celestial realms. During these ceremonies, priests wearing elaborate costumes and masks would perform rituals that were believed to ensure the continuation of the natural cycles that governed agricultural productivity and community prosperity. The art and iconography of Tiamatau reflected the civilization's deep connection to the highland environment and their sophisticated understanding of astronomical and agricultural cycles. Stone sculptures and architectural decorations featured images of condors, pumas, and serpents that represented the different levels of the Andean cosmos, while geometric patterns incorporated symbolic representations of crops, weather phenomena, and celestial bodies. The most famous of Tiwanaku's artistic achievements is the Gateway of the Sun, a massive stone arch carved from a single block of andesite that weighs an estimated 10 tons. The gateway is decorated with intricate relief carvings that depict a central deity figure surrounded by attendant beings in a composition that appears to represent a creation myth or cosmological diagram. The central figure, often called the staff god, holds staffs topped with condor heads and is surrounded by smaller figures that may represent the different aspects of divine power or the various communities that acknowledge Tiwanaku's political and religious authority. Textile production in Tiwanaku reached remarkable levels of artistic and technical achievement, using fibers from vicuñas, alpacas, and other highland animals to create fabrics of extraordinary beauty and durability. The high-altitude environment provided ideal conditions for preserving organic material, and archaeological excavations have recovered textiles that retain their original colors and patterns after more than 1,000 years of burial in the dry highland soil. The weaving techniques used by Tiwanaku textile workers were among the most sophisticated in the ancient world, capable of producing complex patterns and designs that required extraordinary skill and patience to complete. The most elaborate textiles were reserved for ceremonial and religious use, with patterns that incorporated the same symbolic elements found in stone carvings and architectural decorations, creating a unified artistic vocabulary that reinforced the cultural and spiritual beliefs of highland society. The dyeing of textiles used pigments derived from highland plants and minerals that produced colors of remarkable intensity and durability. Red dyes came from cochineal insects that lived on highland cacti, while yellows and oranges were extracted from various native plants, and blues came from mineral sources found in the mountains surrounding Lake Titicaca. The knowledge of where to find these materials and how to process them into stable dyes was closely guarded by specialized craftspeople who achieved social status and economic prosperity through their mastery of these techniques. Metalworking in Tiwanaku was another highly developed craft, with artisans creating objects from gold, silver, copper, and bronze that demonstrated both technical skill and artistic sophistication. The highland location provided access to rich mineral deposits, while the thin atmosphere and intense solar radiation created ideal conditions for smelting metals using solar concentrators and other techniques that took advantage of the unique environmental conditions of the Altiplano. The most impressive metalwork objects from Tiwanaku were ceremonial items used in religious rituals, including elaborate headdresses, breastplates, and ritual vessels that were decorated with repiusi designs, featuring the same iconographic elements found in stone carvings and textiles. These objects were often buried with elite individuals, creating rich archaeological deposits that provide insights into the social organization and religious beliefs of Tiwanaku society. The political organization of Tiwanaku appears to have been based on a combination of religious authority and administrative efficiency that allowed the civilization to coordinate large-scale public works projects while maintaining peaceful relationships with the various ethnic groups that inhabited the Altiplano region. Rather than ruling through military conquest, Tiwanaku seems to have exercised influence through religious prestige, trade relationships, and the practical benefits that came from participating in their agricultural and hydraulic engineering projects. The administrative systems developed by Tiwanaku included sophisticated methods for recording and tracking agricultural production, labor obligations, and the distribution of goods and services throughout their territory. While they did not develop writing in the conventional sense, they used complex systems of knotted strings, known as quipu, to record numerical and possibly narrative information, creating administrative records that could be maintained and consulted over long periods of time. Trade relationships connected Tiwanaku with civilizations throughout the Andes and beyond, bringing exotic goods such as tropical feathers, shells from the Pacific coast, and precious stones from distant regions to the highland capital. These trade networks were maintained through carefully negotiated relationships with communities located along the difficult mountain routes that connected the Altiplano with the outside world, requiring diplomatic skills and cultural sensitivity that reflected the sophisticated political culture of Tiwanaku society. The decline of Tiwanaku began around 1000, apparently due to a combination of climate change and political instability that disrupted the delicate balance between human society and the challenging highland environment. Archaeological evidence suggests that a severe drought lasting several decades made it impossible to maintain the agricultural systems that had supported large populations, forcing communities to abandon the raised field complexes and disperse to locations where they could practice smaller-scale, less intensive farming. The end of Tiwanaku was not marked by violent conquest or sudden catastrophe, but rather by a gradual process of political fragmentation and population dispersal that reflected the civilization's ultimate dependence on environmental conditions beyond human control. As the great ceremonial centers were abandoned and the raised field systems fell into disrepair, the highland region returned to the smaller-scale, village-based societies that had characterized the area before Tiwanaku's rise to prominence. Yet the legacy of Tiwanaku lived on in many ways throughout the Andes region. The agricultural techniques developed by Tiwanaku farmers continued to influence highland farming practices, while their artistic and architectural achievements provided inspiration for later Andean civilizations, including the Inca, who incorporated many Tiwanaku design elements into their own monumental architecture. Modern archaeological research continues to reveal new aspects of Tiwanaku achievement and influence, with recent discoveries suggesting that the civilization's reach extended far beyond the immediate Lake Titicaca region. Raised field systems similar to those developed at Tiwanaku have been found throughout the Andes, while artistic and architectural influences can be traced in archaeological sites from Ecuador to northern Chile. Contemporary efforts to revive traditional Andean agricultural techniques have drawn heavily on the innovations developed by Tiwanaku farmers, with modern communities reconstructing raised field systems and traditional crop varieties as part of sustainable development programs that seek to combine ancient wisdom with contemporary needs. These projects have demonstrated that the agricultural techniques developed over 1,000 years ago remain relevant and effective, capable of producing abundant harvests while protecting the fragile highland environment. As our peaceful journey through these forgotten realms continues to unfold, let the memory of Tiwanaku rest gently in your consciousness. The image of massive stone monuments rising from high mountain plateaus, of ancient farmers working in harmony with harsh highland conditions to create abundance where others saw only desolation, of ceremonies conducted under crystalline skies, where the boundary between earth and heaven seemed to dissolve in the thin mountain air. Now let us travel to another corner of the world, to the river valleys of Central Asia, where another remarkable kingdom once flourished along the ancient trade routes. In the heart of Central Asia, where the mighty Amu Darya River flows toward the disappearing Aral Sea, through landscapes that alternate between fertile oasis and endless desert, there once flourished a kingdom that mastered the art of transforming harsh environments into prosperous civilizations. This was Khwarezm, also known as Khwarezmia, a realm that existed in various forms from ancient times until the Mongol invasions of the 13th century, achieving its greatest glory as a center of learning, commerce, and hydraulic engineering that rivaled any civilization of its time. The kingdom of Khwarezm occupied the delta region of the Amu Darya, where the great river spread into multiple channels before reaching the Aral Sea, creating a natural oasis in the midst of the Karakum Desert. This strategic location made Khwarezm a vital way station on the northern branch of the Silk Road, where merchants traveling between Europe and East Asia could rest, resupply, and conduct business in cities that offered all the amenities and securities of civilized life in the midst of one of the world's most challenging environments. The capital city of Gurganj, known today as Konya-Urganch in Turkmenistan, was built on an island formed by the branching channels of the Amu Darya, its walls and buildings constructed from sun-dried brick that glowed golden in the desert sun. The city was designed around a sophisticated network of canals and waterways that brought life-giving water to every neighborhood, while providing transportation routes for goods and people moving between the various districts of the metropolis. Walking through the streets of medieval Gurganj would have been a sensory experience of remarkable richness and diversity. The air would be filled with the sound of flowing water from the numerous canals and fountains that kept the city cool and green, while the markets would buzz with conversations in dozens of languages as merchants from across the known world conducted their business in the shade of elaborately decorated covered bazaars. The wealth of Khwarezm came from its position as a crucial link in the international trade networks that connected China with the Mediterranean world, but the kingdom's prosperity was built on much more than simple geographical advantage. The people of Khwarezm were master hydraulic engineers who had learned to harness the waters of the Amu Darya through an intricate system of canals, dams, and irrigation works that transformed thousands of square miles of desert into productive agricultural land. The irrigation system of Khwarezm was one of the engineering marvels of the ancient world, consisting of a main canal that was over 100 miles long and numerous subsidiary channels that distributed water with mathematical precision to farms, orchards, and settlements throughout the oasis. The construction and maintenance of this system required not only advanced technical knowledge, but also sophisticated social organization that could coordinate the labor of thousands of workers, while ensuring equitable distribution of water resources among all the communities that depended on the system. Walking through the streets of medieval Gurganj would have been a sensory experience of remarkable richness and diversity. The air would be filled with the sound of flowing water from the numerous canals and fountains that kept the city cool and green, while the markets would buzz with conversations in dozens of languages as merchants from across the known world conducted their business in the shade of elaborately decorated covered bazaars. The wealth of Kawerins came from its position as a crucial link in the international trade networks that connected China with the Mediterranean world, but the kingdom's prosperity was built on much more than simple geographical advantage. The people of Kawerins were master hydraulic engineers who had learned to harness the waters of the Amu Darya through an intricate system of canals, dams, and irrigation works that transformed thousands of square miles of desert into productive agricultural land. The irrigation system of Kawerins was one of the engineering marvels of the ancient world, consisting of a main canal that was over 100 miles long and numerous subsidiary channels that distributed water with mathematical precision to farms, orchards, and settlements throughout the oasis. The construction and maintenance of this system required not only advanced technical knowledge, but also sophisticated social organization that could coordinate the labor of thousands of workers, while ensuring equitable distribution of water resources among all the communities that depended on the system. The management of water resources in Kawerism was governed by complex legal and administrative systems that had evolved over centuries of experience with irrigated agriculture in arid environments. Water rights were carefully defined and rigorously enforced, while seasonal flooding and drought conditions required flexible management approaches that could adapt to changing environmental conditions without disrupting the delicate balance between human needs and natural processes. The agricultural productivity achieved through these irrigation works was legendary throughout the ancient world, with Kawerism producing not only staple grains and vegetables, but also luxury crops such as melons, grapes, and cotton that were prized in markets from Baghdad to Beijing. The kingdom's melons were particularly famous, described by medieval travelers as so sweet and flavorful that they were worth their weight in silver in distant markets, while Kawerism cotton was renowned for its exceptional quality and was sought after by textile manufacturers throughout Asia and Europe. The cultivation of these crops required agricultural techniques that had been refined over generations of farming in the challenging conditions of Central Asia. Farmers learned to work with the rhythms of the river and the patterns of seasonal flooding, timing their planting and harvesting to take advantage of optimal soil conditions while protecting their crops from the extreme temperature variations that characterized the desert climate. Cotton cultivation in Kawerism was particularly sophisticated, involving techniques for soil preparation, irrigation scheduling, and pest control that allowed farmers to produce fiber of exceptional quality and consistency. The cotton fields of Kawerism stretched for miles along the irrigation canals, their white bowls creating landscapes of pristine beauty that seemed to contradict the harsh desert environment that surrounded the oasis. The processing of cotton into thread and fabric was another highly developed industry in Kawerism, with textile workshops that employed hundreds of skilled workers using techniques that had been learned from Chinese, Persian, and Byzantine craftsmen. The finished fabrics produced in these workshops were renowned for their softness, durability, and brilliant colors, achieved through dyeing processes that used both local materials and exotic dyes imported from across the Silk Road network. Urban life in medieval Kawerism reached levels of sophistication and prosperity that rivaled the greatest cities of the Islamic world, with public amenities that included not only the usual mosques, markets, and administrative buildings, but also libraries, hospitals, astronomical observatories, and institutions of higher learning that attracted scholars from across the known world. The kingdom's rulers were great patrons of learning and the arts, creating an intellectual environment that produced some of the most important scientific and philosophical achievements of the medieval period. The Academy of Mamun in Gurganj was one of the most important centers of learning in the medieval world, comparable to the House of Wisdom in Baghdad or the Library of Alexandria in its contribution to the preservation and advancement of human knowledge. The Academy's library contained hundreds of thousands of manuscripts in multiple languages, while its scholars conducted original research in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and other fields that pushed the boundaries of human understanding. Among the most famous scholars associated with Khwarizm were the mathematician and astronomer al-Biruni, whose measurements of the Earth's circumference were remarkably accurate, and the physician and philosopher Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, whose medical textbooks remained standard works in European universities for centuries after his death. These scholars worked in an environment of intellectual freedom and international collaboration that allowed them to build upon the achievements of Greek, Persian, Indian, and Chinese predecessors, while making original contributions that advanced human knowledge in fundamental ways. The astronomical observations conducted in Khwarizm were among the most precise and systematic of the medieval period, using sophisticated instruments and mathematical techniques to track the movements of planets and stars with accuracy that would not be surpassed until the invention of the telescope. The astronomical data collected by Khwarizm scholars was used not only for scientific research, but also for practical applications such as navigation, calendar keeping, and the determination of prayer times and religious holidays. Medical practice in Khwarizm incorporated the best knowledge available from Greek, Persian, Indian, and Islamic sources, while also developing original techniques and treatments based on careful observation and experimentation. The kingdom's hospitals were among the most advanced in the world, with specialized departments for different types of illnesses, surgical procedures that were remarkably sophisticated for their time, and training programs that produced physicians whose skills were sought throughout the Islamic world. The architectural achievements of Khwarizm reflected both the kingdom's prosperity and its cultural sophistication, with buildings that combined functional excellence with aesthetic beauty in ways that created urban environments of remarkable livability and charm. The use of locally produced brick and tile, combined with architectural techniques learned from Persian and Central Asian traditions, created distinctive building styles that were perfectly adapted to the local climate, while expressing the cultural values and artistic sensibilities of Khwarizm society. The Great Mosque of Guganj was one of the architectural wonders of the medieval world, with a minaret that rose over 200 feet into the desert sky and could be seen from miles away across the flat landscape of the river delta. The mosque's interior was decorated with geometric patterns executed in glazed tile work that created effects of almost mystical beauty, while its acoustics were so perfectly designed that a speaker at the mihrab could be heard clearly throughout the vast prayer hall. Residential architecture in Khwarizm was designed to provide comfort and privacy while taking advantage of natural cooling techniques that made life pleasant even during the intense heat of summer. Houses were built around central courtyards where fountains and gardens created cool microclimates, while thick walls and carefully positioned windows provided protection from the desert sun while allowing cooling breezes to circulate through interior spaces. The craft industries of Khwarizm produced goods that were prized throughout the medieval world, including carpets, metalwork, ceramics, and jewelry that combined technical excellence with artistic sophistication. The kingdom's craftsmen were renowned for their ability to work with a wide variety of materials and techniques, creating products that reflected both local traditions and international influences absorbed through the kingdom's extensive trade connections. Carpet weaving in Khwarizm reached levels of artistic achievement that made the kingdom's products among the most sought-after luxury goods in medieval markets. The carpets produced in Khwarizm workshops used wool from local sheep and goats, along with silk imported from China and dyes from across the known world to create textiles of extraordinary beauty and durability. The patterns woven into these carpets told stories of local history and tradition while incorporating design elements from Persian, Turkish, and Chinese artistic traditions. The metalworking industries of Kageraism produced both practical items and decorative objects of remarkable beauty, using techniques for working with bronze, silver, and gold that had been refined over centuries of artistic development. The kingdom's metalworkers were particularly famous for their inlaid work, in which silver and gold were embedded into bronze and iron objects to create decorative patterns of stunning complexity and beauty. The social organization of Kageraism was remarkably egalitarian for a medieval society, with social mobility that allowed individuals to advance based on merit and achievement rather than birth alone. The kingdom's prosperity created opportunities for education and advancement that were available to a broader segment of the population than was typical in most medieval societies, while the international character of trade and scholarship created an cosmopolitan atmosphere that valued diversity and tolerance. Women in Kageraism society enjoyed greater freedom and legal rights than was common in many medieval Islamic societies, with the ability to own property, engage in business, and participate in educational and cultural activities. Archaeological evidence and historical records suggest that women played important roles in the textile industries, while some achieved recognition as scholars, poets, and patrons of the arts. The legal system of Kageraism combined Islamic law with local customs and practical considerations related to trade and irrigation management, creating a flexible framework that could adapt to the diverse needs of a cosmopolitan commercial society. The kingdom's courts were renowned for their fairness and efficiency, while the legal scholars of Kageraism made important contributions to the development of Islamic jurisprudence that influenced legal thinking throughout the Muslim world. The military organization of Kageraism was designed primarily for defense rather than conquest, with emphasis on protecting trade routes and maintaining the hydraulic infrastructure that was essential for the kingdom's survival. The kingdom's armies included both professional soldiers and citizen militias, while alliances with neighboring powers and nomadic tribes provided additional security against external threats. The decline of Kageraism began in the late 12th century, as political instability and changing trade patterns reduced the kingdom's prosperity and international influence. The final catastrophe came with the Mongol invasion of 1221, when the armies of Genghis Khan destroyed the irrigation systems, slaughtered the population, and left the once prosperous oasis cities in ruins that would never be fully rebuilt. The destruction of Kageraism by the Mongols was one of the great tragedies of medieval history, representing the loss not only of a prosperous and sophisticated civilization, but also of irreplaceable cultural and scientific achievements that had taken centuries to accumulate. The kingdom's libraries were burned, its scholars killed or scattered, and its irrigation works destroyed so thoroughly that much of the region returned to desert and has never recovered its former prosperity. Yet the intellectual legacy of Kageraism lived on through the works of its scholars, which had been copied and preserved in libraries throughout the Islamic world, while the memory of the kingdom's achievements continued to inspire later generations of scientists, philosophers, and engineers. The hydraulic techniques developed in Kageraism influenced irrigation projects throughout Central Asia and the Middle East, while the scientific and philosophical works produced by Kageraism scholars continued to be studied and built upon for centuries after the kingdom's destruction. Modern archaeological work in the former territories of Kageraism continues to reveal evidence of the kingdom's remarkable achievements, with excavations uncovering the remains of cities, irrigation works, and cultural artifacts that provide insights into one of history's most successful experiments in creating prosperity and civilization in challenging environmental conditions. The ruins of ancient Gurganji, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, stand as monuments to human achievement and reminders of the fragility of even the most sophisticated civilizations. As our gentle journey through these forgotten realms continues, let the memory of Kageraism's golden age settle peacefully in your consciousness. the image of water flowing through desert cities, of scholars working in libraries filled with the accumulated wisdom of the world, of merchants and craftsmen creating prosperity through patient skill and international cooperation. Now let us travel to the mountains of the Caucasus, where another remarkable kingdom once bridged the worlds of Europe and Asia. In the rugged mountains of the Caucasus, where snow-capped peaks rise like ancient cathedrals toward an azure sky, and deep valleys shelter communities that have maintained their unique cultures for millennia, there once flourished a Christian kingdom that served as a bridge between the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world, creating a unique civilization that combined European, Asian, and indigenous traditions in harmonious synthesis. This was the medieval kingdom of Georgia, which reached its zenith during the 12th and 13th centuries, under the reign of Queen Tamar, becoming a center of Christian culture, artistic achievement, and political sophistication that influenced the entire region. The Kingdom of Georgia emerged in the 11th century through the unification of various principalities that had existed in the Caucasus region since ancient times, drawing together communities that spoke related languages and shared cultural traditions while maintaining their distinct local identities. The resulting kingdom combined the ancient Georgian regions of Kartli and Kakheti with territories that extended from the Black Sea to the Caspian Sea, creating a realm that controlled the vital trade routes connecting Europe with Asia, while maintaining its independence from the great empires that surrounded it. The capital city of Tbilisi was built in a strategic location where the Kura River cuts through the Caucasus Mountains, creating a natural corridor that facilitated trade and communication, while providing defensive advantages against potential invaders. The city was constructed on terraced hillsides that rose from the river valley, with buildings that incorporated both Georgian architectural traditions and influences from Byzantine and Islamic sources, creating a distinctive urban landscape that reflected the kingdom's position at the crossroads of different civilizations. The royal palace complex in Tbilisi was renowned throughout the medieval world for its elegance and sophistication, with buildings that combined fortress-like defensive capabilities with residential amenities that rivaled any European court of the period. The palace was built around a series of courtyards and gardens, where Georgian and imported plants created oases of beauty and tranquility, while elaborate water features provided cooling during the warm summers and created pleasant background sounds that enhanced the peaceful atmosphere of royal life. The wealth of medieval Georgia came from its control of trade routes that carried goods between Europe and Asia, but the kingdom's prosperity was built on much more than geographical advantages. Georgian merchants and craftsmen developed reputations for honesty and quality that made Georgian products welcome in markets from Constantinople to Beijing, while the kingdom's rulers invested the profits from trade in cultural and religious institutions that enhanced Georgia's international prestige and influence. Georgian winemaking was already an ancient art by the medieval period, with techniques that had been refined over thousands of years of experience with the grape varieties that thrived in the kingdom's diverse climate zones. The wines produced in Georgian vineyards were renowned throughout the medieval world for their distinctive flavors and remarkable quality, achieved through traditional fermentation methods using large clay vessels called chou-vivri that were buried in the earth to maintain optimal temperature and humidity conditions. The process of winemaking in medieval Georgia was as much art as agriculture, requiring knowledge and skills that were passed down through generations of vintners who understood the subtle relationships between soil conditions, weather patterns, and the various grape varieties that grew in different regions of the kingdom. The harvest season was a time of community celebration, with entire villages participating in the picking and processing of grapes, while traditional songs and dances provided entertainment and helped to coordinate the work. Georgian cuisine reached remarkable levels of sophistication during the medieval period, incorporating ingredients and cooking techniques from throughout the kingdom's diverse territories, while developing distinctive flavors and preparations that reflected the abundance and variety of local agricultural production. The kingdom's cooks were renowned for their skill in combining meat, vegetables, herbs, and spices in ways that created complex and satisfying meals that provided both nutrition and pleasure for people engaged in the demanding work of mountain agriculture and long-distance trade. The Christian culture of Georgia was one of the kingdom's most distinctive characteristics, representing one of the world's oldest Christian traditions that had maintained its independence and unique character despite centuries of pressure from neighboring Islamic and pagan powers. Georgian Christianity incorporated elements of local tradition with Orthodox theology and Byzantine liturgical practices, creating a distinctive form of the faith that was expressed through magnificent church architecture, elaborate religious ceremonies, and a rich tradition of religious literature and music. The monasteries of Georgia were among the most important centers of learning and artistic production in the medieval Christian world, with scriptoriums where monks copied religious texts in the distinctive Georgian alphabet, while creating illuminated manuscripts that combined theological content with artistic excellence. These monasteries also served as centers of historical and philosophical scholarship, preserving not only religious texts, but also secular works that documented Georgian history, law, and cultural traditions. The architecture of Georgian churches represented one of the high points of medieval Christian art, with buildings that combined structural innovation with aesthetic sophistication in ways that created spaces perfectly designed for religious worship and community gathering. The distinctive Georgian church design featured central domes supported by innovative engineering techniques, while the exterior walls were decorated with carved stone reliefs that told stories from Christian tradition and Georgian history. The monastery of Galati, founded in the early 12th century, was one of the most important centers of learning in the medieval world, with a library that contained thousands of manuscripts in Georgian, Greek, Armenian, and other languages. The monastery's scholars engaged in sophisticated theological and philosophical research, while also conducting practical studies in fields such as medicine, astronomy, and mathematics that contributed to the advancement of human knowledge. The golden age of Georgian culture reached its peak during the reign of Queen Tamar, who ruled from 1184 to 1213 and became one of the most revered monarchs in Georgian history. Under her leadership, the kingdom achieved unprecedented prosperity and territorial expansion, while fostering a flowering of arts and literature that produced some of the greatest masterpieces of medieval culture. Queen Tamar's court attracted poets, scholars, artists, and musicians from throughout the region, creating a cultural environment that encouraged creativity and innovation. The most famous literary achievement of Queen Tamar's reign was The Knight in the Panther's Skin, an epic poem by Shota Rustaveli that is considered one of the masterpieces of medieval literature. The poem tells the story of heroic knights whose adventures span continents and cultures, while exploring themes of love, friendship, loyalty, and the relationship between earthly and divine realms. The work demonstrates remarkable literary sophistication, while embodying the cultural values and spiritual beliefs that characterized Georgian society at its height. The artistic achievements of medieval Georgia extended far beyond literature to include remarkable works in metalworking, enamel work, and manuscript illumination that demonstrated technical mastery and aesthetic sophistication that rivaled any contemporary civilization. Georgian craftsmen were particularly renowned for their cloisonné enamel work, using techniques that had been learned from Byzantine masters, but adapted to create distinctively Georgian artistic styles and iconographic programs. The Begrati Cathedral in Kutaisi, built during the 11th century, represents one of the pinnacles of Georgian architectural achievement, with innovative structural engineering that allowed for unprecedented height and interior space, while creating acoustic properties that enhanced the performance of Georgian liturgical music. The cathedral's design influenced church architecture throughout the region and demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of mathematics and engineering that characterized Georgian builders. Georgian polyphonic singing was one of the kingdom's most distinctive cultural achievements, representing a musical tradition of extraordinary complexity and beauty that had developed over centuries of liturgical and secular practice. The traditional Georgian singing style featured three-part harmony with intricate melodic lines that created effects of remarkable richness and emotional power, while the texts of the songs preserved ancient traditions and historical memories that connected medieval Georgians with their ancestral heritage. The agricultural systems of medieval Georgia were adapted to the kingdom's diverse topography and climate zones, ranging from the subtropical regions along the Black Sea coast to the high mountain valleys, where specialized crops and livestock breeding techniques had been developed to take advantage of local conditions. Georgian farmers were particularly skilled in terraced agriculture that allowed for productive farming on steep mountain slopes, while also developing sophisticated irrigation systems that brought water to previously arid regions. The mountainous terrain of Georgia required transportation and communication systems that could function effectively in challenging topographical conditions, leading to the development of an extensive network of mountain roads and fortified way stations that facilitated trade and administrative communication throughout the kingdom. These roads were engineering marvels that used sophisticated techniques for dealing with steep grades, unstable soil conditions, and extreme weather, while the fortified posts provided security for travelers and served as centers for local administration. The military organization of medieval Georgia was designed to take advantage of the kingdom's mountainous terrain and the martial traditions of its people, creating defensive systems that could resist invasion while also projecting power when necessary to protect Georgian interests and allies. Georgian heavy cavalry was renowned throughout the region for its effectiveness in both mountain warfare and battles on the open plains that bordered the kingdom, while Georgian archers and infantry were skilled in the techniques of fortress defense that made the kingdom's mountain strongholds virtually impregnable. The legal system of medieval Georgia combined Christian principles with local customary law and practical considerations related to the kingdom's diverse population and complex economic activities. Georgian law codes demonstrated sophisticated understanding of jurisprudence while maintaining flexibility that allowed for adaptation to local conditions and changing circumstances, creating a legal framework that provided justice and stability for all segments of society. Imagine Georgian society enjoyed considerable freedom and legal rights compared to women in many other medieval societies, with the ability to inherit property, participate in business activities, and achieve positions of political and religious authority. Queen Tamar herself served as the ultimate example of female achievement in Georgian society, while other women achieved recognition as scholars, artists, and religious leaders who made important contributions to Georgian cultural and spiritual life. The international relations of medieval Georgia were characterized by sophisticated diplomacy that allowed the kingdom to maintain its independence, while building alliances and trade relationships with powers throughout Europe and Asia. Georgian diplomats served in courts from Paris to Cairo, while foreign ambassadors were received in Tbilisi with ceremonies that demonstrated the kingdom's wealth and cultural sophistication. These diplomatic relationships were essential for maintaining the delicate balance of power that allowed Georgia to prosper despite being surrounded by much larger empires. Trade relationships connected medieval Georgia with markets throughout the known world, with Georgian merchants conducting business from the ports of the Black Sea to the bazaars of Central Asia. The kingdom's strategic location made it an essential link in the trade networks that connected Europe with Asia, while the quality and reliability of Georgian products created demand for the kingdom's goods in distant markets. Georgian merchants were particularly renowned for their knowledge of languages and customs, skills that were essential for successful long-distance trade in the diverse cultural environment of medieval Eurasia. The educational system of medieval Georgia was among the most advanced in the contemporary world, with schools and academies that provided instruction not only in religious subjects but also in secular fields such as philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. The Georgian language developed a rich literary tradition during this period, with writers creating works in both religious and secular genres that demonstrated remarkable linguistic sophistication and artistic achievement. The decline of medieval Georgia began in the 3rd century with the Mongol invasions that devastated much of the kingdom and disrupted the trade networks that had been the foundation of its prosperity. Unlike some other regions, Georgia managed to maintain a degree of autonomy under Mongol rule, but the kingdom never fully recovered its former power and territorial extent. Subsequent invasions by various Islamic powers further weakened the kingdom, leading to centuries of foreign domination that only ended with incorporation into the Russian Empire in the early 19th century. Yet the cultural and spiritual legacy of medieval Georgia lived on through the preservation of its language, literature, religious traditions, and artistic achievements that continued to influence Georgian society even under foreign rule. The Georgian Orthodox Church maintained its independence and continued to serve as a guardian of Georgian cultural identity, while traditional crafts, music, and other cultural practices were preserved by communities throughout the region. Modern Georgia continues to celebrate its medieval heritage through the preservation of architectural monuments, the performance of traditional music and dance, and the maintenance of cultural traditions that provide direct connections to the kingdom's golden age. The poetry of Shota Rustaveli remains central to Georgian cultural identity, while traditional winemaking techniques and other cultural practices continue to connect contemporary Georgians with their medieval ancestors. Archaeological research throughout Georgia continues to reveal new evidence of the kingdom's achievements and influence, with excavations uncovering churches, fortifications, and other structures that demonstrate the sophistication of medieval Georgian civilization. The preservation and study of medieval Georgian manuscripts has also provided insights into the intellectual and cultural life of the period, while traditional music and other intangible cultural practices continue to be documented and preserved for future generations. As our peaceful journey through these forgotten realms draws toward its close, let the memory of Georgia's mountain kingdom rest gently in your thoughts. The image of church bells echoing across mountain valleys, of royal courts, where poets recited epic verses, while courtiers dressed in silk and gold listened in appreciation, of monasteries perched on cliff tops, where monks preserved the wisdom and artistic achievements of centuries. Now let us complete our journey with one final kingdom, a realm that existed at the very edge of the known world, at the confluence of the Limpopo and Shash rivers in southern Africa, where ancient baobab trees spread their massive canopies over landscapes that seem unchanged since the dawn of time. There once flourished a sophisticated African kingdom that controlled trade networks stretching from the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic, creating the first complex state society in the region, and laying the foundations for the later glory of Great Zimbabwe. This was the kingdom of Mapungubwe, which flourished from approximately 1075 to 1220 CE. Achieving remarkable prosperity through the development of sophisticated political institutions, advanced metallurgical techniques, and far-reaching trade relationships that connected the African interior with the wider world. The kingdom of Mapungubwe was centered on a dramatic sandstone hill that rises from the surrounding savanna like a natural fortress, its steep cliffs and flat summit providing both defensive advantages and symbolic power that made it an ideal location for a royal capital. Archaeological evidence suggests that the hilltop was reserved for the royal family and their closest advisors, while the surrounding valleys contained the homes of craftspeople, farmers, and ordinary citizens who supported the kingdom's political and economic activities. The wealth of Mapungubwe came from its control of gold mining and trade networks that connected the mineral-rich regions of the South African interior with coastal ports where merchants from across the Indian Ocean came to exchange goods. Gold was extracted from numerous mines scattered throughout the kingdom's territory, using techniques that combined indigenous African knowledge with innovations that allowed for more efficient extraction and processing of the precious metal. The process of gold mining in ancient southern Africa required sophisticated understanding of geological conditions and mining techniques that had been developed through generations of experience with the region's unique mineral deposits. Miners worked during the cooler months of the year, following gold-bearing veins deep into the earth through narrow shafts and tunnels that required careful engineering to prevent collapse while providing adequate ventilation for the workers below. The gold extracted from these mines was processed using traditional techniques that involved crushing the ore, washing it to separate the gold from other minerals, and then melting the pure metal to create ingots, jewelry, and ceremonial objects that demonstrated both technical skill and artistic sophistication. The most famous artifact from Mapungubwe is a golden rhinoceros, intricately crafted from gold foil over a wooden core, which demonstrates the remarkable metalworking skills of the kingdom's craftspeople. The golden rhinoceros of Mapungubwe represents more than just artistic achievement. It embodies the symbolic and spiritual significance that these animals held in southern African culture, where rhinoceros were associated with chiefly power, spiritual authority, and the connection between earthly rulers and ancestral spirits. The creation of such an object required not only technical mastery of goldworking techniques, but also deep understanding of the cultural and religious traditions that gave meaning to artistic expression. Daily life in Mapungubwe was organized around the seasonal rhythms of agriculture and trade, with the majority of the population engaged in farming activities that took advantage of the region's fertile soils and relatively reliable rainfall. The kingdom's farmers cultivated indigenous African crops such as sorghum, millet, and various legumes, while also raising cattle, sheep, and goats that provided both food and materials for clothing and other necessities. Cattle held particular importance in Mapungubwe society, serving not only as sources of food and materials, but also as symbols of wealth and social status that were essential for marriage negotiations, political alliances, and religious ceremonies. The management of cattle herds required sophisticated understanding of grazing patterns, seasonal movement, and breeding practices that had been refined over centuries of pastoralist tradition in the southern African environment. The architecture of Mapungubwe reflected both the practical needs of life in the southern African climate and the social hierarchies that characterized the kingdom's political organization. Elite residences were built from carefully shaped stone blocks that provided durability and status, while commoner homes were constructed from local materials such as clay, wood, and thatch that were well adapted to local environmental conditions, but could be more easily modified or replaced as circumstances required. The royal palace complex on Mapungubwe Hill was a marvel of indigenous African architecture, with buildings that combined functional efficiency with symbolic significance in ways that reflected the sacred character of royal authority. The complex included residential areas, ceremonial spaces, storage facilities, and workshops, where royal craftspeople created the luxury goods that demonstrated the kingdom's wealth and sophisticated material culture. Religious life in Mapungubwe was centered around ancestor veneration and spiritual practices that connected the living community with the spirits of deceased rulers and other important figures who were believed to continue influencing earthly affairs from the realm of the ancestors. These beliefs were expressed through elaborate burial practices, ritual ceremonies, and the creation of sacred spaces where communication with the spiritual world could be conducted according to traditional protocols. The burial practices of Mapungubwe's elite demonstrate the kingdom's wealth and the sophisticated social hierarchies that characterized its political organization. High-status individuals were buried with elaborate grave goods, including gold jewelry, imported ceramics, glass beads, and other luxury items that reflected both their earthly achievements and their continued importance in the ancestral realm. Trade relationships connected Mapungubwe with distant markets through networks that stretched across the African continent and beyond, bringing exotic goods from as far away as China and India to the royal courts of southern Africa. These trade relationships were maintained through carefully negotiated agreements with intermediary communities and coastal merchants who facilitated the exchange of African gold and ivory for manufactured goods that were highly prized by Mapungubwe's elite. The imported goods found in Mapungubwe archaeological sites provide remarkable evidence of the kingdom's international connections, including Chinese Celadon ceramics, Indian Ocean glass beads, and other manufactured items that had traveled thousands of miles to reach the African interior. These goods were not merely exotic curiosities, but were integrated into local social and religious practices in ways that demonstrate the sophisticated cultural synthesis that characterized Mapungubwe society. Ivory trade was another important source of wealth for Mapungubwe, with elephant hunting providing both a valuable export commodity and an important source of protein for the kingdom's population. The hunting of elephants required sophisticated organization and specialized skills, while the processing of ivory into trade goods and decorative objects demonstrated the technical abilities of Mapungubwe's craftspeople. The craft industries of Mapungubwe produced goods that were traded throughout southern Africa and beyond, including iron tools and weapons, copper ornaments, pottery, and textiles that demonstrated both technical skill and artistic achievement. Iron smelting was a particularly important industry, with furnaces that used advanced techniques to produce high-quality metal that was essential for agricultural tools, weapons, and other necessities of daily life. The political organization of Mapungubwe appears to have been based on a sacred kingship system that combined secular authority with religious functions, similar to political institutions found in other parts of Africa, but adapted to the specific cultural and environmental conditions of the southern African region. The king, or Mumbo, served not only as political leader, but also as intermediary between the human and spiritual worlds, responsible for maintaining the harmony between earthly and ancestral realms that was believed essential for the kingdom's continued prosperity. The end of Mapungubwe was not marked by violent destruction, but rather by a gradual process of political fragmentation and population dispersal that saw the kingdom's population migrate to new centers, such as Great Zimbabwe, where they established successor states that continued many of the political, economic, and cultural traditions that had been developed at Mapungubwe. The legacy of Mapungubwe lived on in the later civilizations of southern Africa, including Great Zimbabwe and other states that adopted similar political institutions, trade practices, and architectural traditions. The kingdom's achievements in gold working, international trade, and political organization provided foundations for the later flowering of Zimbabwe culture that would dominate the region for several more centuries. Modern archaeological research at Mapungubwe has revealed remarkable evidence of the kingdom's achievements and influence, with excavations uncovering sophisticated urban planning, advanced metallurgical techniques, and extensive trade connections that demonstrate the complexity and sophistication of early African civilization. The site is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site that serves as a testament to the achievements of indigenous African societies and their contributions to world civilization. The golden rhinoceros and other artifacts from Mapungubwe are now displayed in museums where they continue to inspire wonder and admiration for the artistic and technical achievements of ancient African craftspeople, while ongoing research continues to reveal new aspects of the kingdom's culture and influence. These discoveries have helped to correct historical narratives that had underestimated the sophistication and achievements of African civilizations, while providing inspiration for contemporary African nations seeking to understand and celebrate their historical heritage. As our journey through these forgotten realms comes to its peaceful conclusion, Let the memory of Mapungubwe rest gently in your consciousness. The image of golden artifacts glinting in African sunlight, of royal courts where the wisdom of ancestors guided earthly rulers, of trade networks that connected distant continents through the patient work of merchants and craftspeople who understood that prosperity comes through cooperation rather than conquest. And so, dear travelers, our gentle journey through the mists of time draws to its peaceful close. We have wandered together through kingdoms that once flourished in every corner of our world, from the golden sands of Kush beside the life-giving Nile to the coral atolls of Tonga scattered across the vast Pacific, from the spice-scented ports of Srivijaya to the mountain fortresses of Georgia, where church bells echoed across ancient valleys. These forgotten realms remind us that human civilization has taken many forms, that prosperity and cultural achievement have flourished in environments both harsh and gentle, that the seeds of greatness can sprout in the most unlikely places when tended by patient hands, guided by wisdom, and sustained by hope. In each of these kingdoms, we have seen how human beings learn to work in harmony with their natural environments, how they built networks of trade and cultural exchange that enriched all who participated, how they created works of art and learning that continue to inspire wonder more than a millennium after their creation. As you drift towards sleep, let these images settle gently in your mind, like sediment in a peaceful river. The pearl divers of Dilmun rising from crystalline depths with treasures in their hands, the Sogdian merchants crossing desert and mountain with their precious cargoes, the craftspeople of Mapungubwe shaping gold into works of lasting beauty. Let the rhythm of their lives, lived in harmony with the turning of seasons and the movement of stars, slow your breathing and ease your journey into dreams.